Okay. We'll call to order the meeting, and I think, and so we'll start off with roll call.
Anderson,
Here.
Patrick,
Here.
Broker,
Here.
Clark,
Here.
Dawn. Lachey.
Yes.
And Nancy.
Thank you. Next, we will move on to the approval of the minutes. Did everyone, oh, I'm sorry, oh, yeah, you're right, the approval of the agenda. Thank you, Holly. The approval of the agenda. Is there, we want to discuss the agenda or? I know
There
there
was
was.
an email about potentially
No.
pushing off some of the discussions until we had Steve, but I don't know if that's something we.
I don't think that would affect the agenda, would it?
It could potentially, that was my email. I talked to, Chair Mans this afternoon, and I think he had talked to some of you, including the chairwoman. And so as far as I'm concerned, we can go ahead and have the presentation since they're here or going to be here, as far as I'm concerned, and then just go ahead and discuss the items 7B and C. When we get to 7C, let's see how it goes, but we could table it or keep it on the agenda as we go. So I'm fine with the
Mhm.
agenda as it is.
Okay, so we'll leave the agenda. We can always, of course, carry over into next meetings. Okay, so
Do we have to do a,
I think we have to do a.
make a
vote.
motion to approve the agenda?
Yes. Would someone like to make a motion?
Yes.
to
so
approve?
moved.
Oh, okay.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we'll move forward with the agenda. Now the approval of the minutes. Did everyone have a chance to look at them or? Okay.
Yeah, I'll make
is-
a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our December 21, 2023 meeting.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Meeting minutes from the last meeting are approved. So we will move on to the guest speaker. Actually, I think we have two guest speakers. Which Ryan, I'll pass it off to you for introductions.
Well, thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and good evening, everyone. It's good to have the Planning Commission back together this month. So as you recall from your meeting last month, you had quite a lengthy discussion about the short-term rental task force recommendations that they made to you. And so we have an agenda item tonight to kind of cover some potential draft ordinance language based on that discussion. But you had a separate discussion at your last meeting about whether or not the Planning Commission had interest in pursuing further evaluation of short-term rental caps that relates to residential neighborhoods. And then there was some concerns raised about whether or not we should have some specific parking regulations for short-term rentals as well. So as part of that discussion, there was agreement, at least amongst the majority, to kind of continue with that further study and evaluation and discussions into this meeting. There was a request made to, maybe invite a couple guest speakers from other communities, maybe have some similarities to Saugatuck to kind of hear about their experiences with caps. What went well, what are some lessons that they've learned, what maybe didn't go as expected. And so reached out to a couple folks up north. So tonight we have with us the City of Charlevoix Zoning Administrator and Enforcement Officer Jonathan Skeel, and East Bay Charter Township Community Development Fellow Sam Lususa. So happy to kick it off to one of them here in a moment. They're going to give you maybe a 5 to 7 minute just kind of verbal presentation on their experiences, and then we'll turn it over to you to ask them a few questions before they take off for this evening. So, all right.
Great. Thank you.
So, well, Jonathan, you're first maybe on the list. You want to go first?
Sure.
Well, thank
Good
you for being here. We really appreciate it. So welcome virtually to Saugatuck.
Yep. Thank you very much. I have visited your city and I love it. It's a great city. So good evening, Madam Chairwoman and Planning Commissioners. City of Charlevoix, I believe, is very similar to you in our population, our short-term rental and summer seasons. and so hopefully what I give you tonight has some value. We looked at short-term rentals starting about 5 years ago. The city council drafted a police power ordinance, so it is not under zoning. So our planning commission in Charlevoix did not participate in the rules and the short-term rental conversation. The city council had about 8 public meetings. It was a lot, but I think it was very valuable, and I think brought both sides closer to the middle. And I think along the way changed our city council's minds on a few things. So with that, it started with a number of city councilmen wanting to have no cap whatsoever. And we had one or more down to we don't want short-term rentals at all. So it was a widespread. And again, it took that 8 meetings to figure out what they finally came up with. So the ordinance allows the short-term rentals in every zone district. We regulate only in the residential R1 and R2 districts. So the rest are non-regulated, no fees, just kind of wild west. And that has and overall turned out okay. The city council ended up with a cap of 80, which is approximately 6% of our residential housing units. The research I did at the time, which the vast majority were out west, not a whole lot close to Michigan, ranged in the 10% range. Since then, I've seen some as high as 25% and some as low as 2%. Moving quickly ahead, the 80 ended up being a good number. We originally sent out a questionnaire to the entire population and asked for a basically an application of interest if they were interested in participating in the short-term rental program. We ended up getting over 200 that showed interest. I think the vast majority of them were just trying to placehold because rumor had it that we were only going to give licenses at first to local residents, and then after that to people that did not live in the city, which ended up being true. We did do that. But out of that 200 original showing interest, only about 40 initially signed up and actually registered for a license in the first 6 months. It then took over a year to get the other 40. So it took a year and a half to get all 80 licenses out, which surprised me, but it ended up again being a pretty good number. Since that time, so another 2.5 years, we now have about 17 on the waiting list. 7 of those are local residents, and the other 10 are out of state or downstate residents. One of the things from the enforcement side on that cap is I believe the trouble that we've had is not as much about the 80, it's about where they are in the city. So it is about the space between. So our main complaint areas are 3 areas that there's just as many or more short-term rentals on a city block on one street side as there are local residents. And that becomes a problem. And that is where our parking is, that's where our noise problems are, that's where we had outdoor fire issues, and that again mainly is the main enforcement issues that we have in Charlevoix. So if I had to do it again, writing an ordinance, I would probably push for a number of feet between short-term rentals. One of the things I've talked to other planners, and I just kind of like this, continually seeing what other jurisdictions are doing, and I'm seeing that they are pulling back and actually trying to lose licenses rather than increasing or staying the same. So one of the suggestions I would have is start low, and you can add every year, every month, every whatever you would like. Adding is a lot easier than trying to take them back again. Let me quick look at my notes. Just recently, we started talking about potential changes in front of City Council now that we're about 4 years into it. And a couple of things that the City Council has asked administration to move forward with language was we originally had inspections every 2 years. After our first inspection, staff really came up with the amount of time and energy into that. There isn't going to be a lot of changes every 2 years. So besides checking on smoke detectors, a lot is really not going to change the health and safety of visitors. So they are advising that we will only have the original inspection. And if there's complaints, or if I have concerns, maybe after that first inspection, they barely, pass, that I have the option or opportunity to re-inspect if I would like. The other thing we did originally is we allowed 14 days of short-term rental for anyone in the city without a license, kind of tying that to the state assessing law that basically states you can rent things and do things for 14 days and it doesn't change your PRE. We found that that was very problematic and basically unenforceable, because the data that we get from our contract of host compliance does not tie to that 14 days. So I don't know if they have rented 1 day, 14 days, or 70 days. So they are getting rid of that. And lastly, to promote new housing units, which we really don't have in Charlevoix because of being very small, landlocked, and pretty much built out. They are advising that we allow any brand new ADU that can get a short-term rental license without being on the waiting list. So hopefully that promotes some new housing units. And even if they are ADUs, they probably won't be ADUs forever. So that is kind of my experience and Charlevoix's experience with short-term rentals and the short-term rental program for the last 4 years.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jonathan. That's very good information. I know it's a lot of history to pack into 5 to 7 minutes. So I really appreciate the information that you just shared. I think we'll switch over to Sam, let him present, and then we'll open it up to questions. So.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
We sure can, Sam. Welcome to Saugatuck on the virtual end of things.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. So East Bay Township's journey with short-term rentals, well, started way before 2019. Historically, our township has had what we called cabin courts or short-term rentals along all of the inland lakes along here. So there were a lot of areas with grandfathered in, historical uses of short-term rentals along here. And so in 2019, they tried to wrap their arms around it with implementing an ordinance that enacted an application process and licenses for short-term rentals. So if you wanted to operate a short-term rental, you applied for a license. They quickly found that they were inundated with applications and quickly almost jumped up to about 200 licenses being issued. At that point, a moratorium was put in place while they reevaluated the ordinance that they had put in effect. And in reevaluating that, some of the main changes that came out of that were implementing a cap of 145 units of rental licenses being issued. And that is about 2.5% of our total housing stock. That number was came up with a number of different research on existing short-term rentals we had, other long-term rentals, housing units, what the market was kind of driving and various things like that. And that can allow for adjustment over time as East Bay grows and as more housing units become built here, we can potentially reevaluate that number of 145 available licenses. That is currently more than we that we have more licenses than we currently allow. So I will definitely echo the point of that it is easier to add more than it is to get rid of them. Over the last year, we've probably relinquished in whatever form about 20 licenses, but we're still about 15 away from being at our cap. So it's taking quite a bit of time. So that brings us to where we are currently with our newest ordinance. The main changes that we also implemented were a 100-foot or 1,000-foot separation between any new short-term rentals. So we have that in play. All existing short-term rentals, as long as they keep renewing and doing all the things, are kind of grandfathered in, but any new licenses would be beholden to that 1,000-foot separation. We also asked that any homes that are on septic systems get a Grand Traverse County well and septic inspection, verifying that the size of the system is appropriate for the new use as a short-term rental. We factor in the number of occupants at 2 per bedroom plus 4. So in a 3-bedroom home, that would be 10 occupants, and so that's a lot different than the single family use that it was potentially initially built for. So really trying to verify that we're protecting our water quality here in the township. Another stipulation is we increase the minimum stay length from 4 days to 7 days per individual rental of a short-term rental. So that's kind of the turnover rate. So say you had somebody rent it for 4 days, you'd have to leave it open and unrented for an additional 3 days before the next tenant could move in. And we also implemented requiring signage and education to our people that are renting on invasive species and how to protect our inland lakes and streams. I think as far as it's been really nice to actually point to an ordinance. The moratorium was a little bit of a confusing part for the public, I think, to wrap their head around what that meant. Again, a lot of calls on, are there any licenses available? What's the process? And you're kind of like, well, we're in the middle. And so that became a little bit of a challenge. Our ordinance is a zoning ordinance, is how we did it. We talked with our attorney and he recommended going the ordinance route versus a police power route, just based on enforceability, and that was the recommendation we received. I'm trying to think. I haven't really experienced a ton of problems with our ordinance necessarily. I think it's pretty enforceable. We've had quite a lot of success in being able to enforce based on what we have in there. We also haven't had any new applications come through because we are over our cap. So we'll see how that plays out with the new application process. The 1,000-foot separation is challenging to administratively handle. It involves a lot of checking and verifying and things. So it would be great if one of these companies that manages these could figure out, like, you plug in your address and it gives you a green thumbs up that like you're 1,000 feet far enough away from the other ones. But that is not here yet. yeah, I think those are kind of the main points that I have that I wanted to kind of cover, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
Well, thank you, Sam. Also very, very good information and helpful information. So Madam Chair, if you'd like to open it up to some questions from your fellow commissioners.
Yeah, I'd love to open it up if anyone has questions for Jonathan and Sam.
I actually have questions that probably pertain to both of them.
Yeah,
I guess at a high, well, thank you first. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. It's very helpful and it's enlightening information. I'm kind of curious, what drove you to look at caps in the first place? Maybe Jonathan, start with you. You said, was it 5 years ago you started looking at it?
Correct. We, saw the short-term rental program, coming across the United States, starting out west. We knew it was coming to our city, and the city council was smart enough to get in front of it, I believe. And so we, like East Bay, are also had short-term rentals, cottages, whatever you want to call them, our city, and I'm sure yours is the same. It's been that way for the last 100 years. The difference is short-term rentals today, online, being able to do one click, sit here on my computer and get that right now is very different than in the past, where you were making phone calls, you had to know somebody who knew somebody, and you weren't getting these homes rented every single weekend during the summer and elsewhere through the year. So they started this again. The city council started looking at that, figuring out what best practices were, and knew that there had to be some type of regulation, and that really was it. Is just the progressive enough to know that it was going to become a problem, and they called it correctly. It definitely there are still minor issues, but without a regulation, it would really be problematic for our year-round citizens.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
you said 80 units is a total, correct?
80, and so they added so those are called business licenses. They added a personal license, which was for full-time residents that had a PRE. They could get a license called a personal license that it doesn't have a cap, doesn't have a waiting list. But interestingly enough, and they had some different rules, only 2 of those exist. And so that really, they were trying to do something extra for the local residents, and it just really hasn't taken off. But so there's 82 actually in our city at this point.
Out of roughly how many residential dwellings?
1,200?
100?
Well,
12.
1,200.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
yes, please.
For either of you or both of you, was there a financial impact study done through this process, through those 8 meetings in Charlevoix, or through the processes at East Bay? What the financial impact would be to cap them, or or any results of what that impact has been?
Sam, do you have an answer for that?
I don't know if one was conducted to establish that 2.5%, but I do know that it was an attempt to be a balancing act between allowing for the economic driver that short-term rentals is while still protecting our housing stock. So I can kind of echo what you were saying in that the main goal was to allow for this, but within reason. And the reason we implemented our cap was to stop what was kind of a snowball running out of control, where we had over 200 rentals, and that was drastically affecting our housing stock. It was taking up entire blocks of neighborhoods as short-term rentals. I think a lot of it was people purchasing homes specifically in this area because it was allowable in our township where it isn't allowable in a lot of surrounding communities. And so it was really in an effort to allow for that economic opportunity, but also protect the residents of the permanent residents of East Bay Township.
So I think Sam nailed it on that. So we have really exact same issues. The what is different though, I think, about East Bay and Charlevoix is, as I mentioned before, it took a year and a half for us to get to that 80. So, you know, speculating, we didn't have a giant negative financial impact really on anybody. East Bay may not be able to say that because they have really a lot more licenses than they want to do that balance, and now they're backing away from that. So I don't believe it was really at all a negative financial impact for bringing in tourists or where they stay. I don't believe we're really pushing them somewhere else, which was a big concern. Realtors, you know, stated we're going to send them to all the other cities. I just don't think any of that, in
Oh, you froze up.
fact, was how much time I am spending on the short-term rental program. And there's probably a full 20% of my time is administering that program. So that is something that, you know, we ended up, the license costs, you know, do take care of that and do take care of hiring host compliance. But time wise, it definitely affected, and so the time I spend.
But I heard neither location had a financial impact study done, is what I think I heard.
So the simple answer is no, absolutely not.
Okay.
No, and we're a little too early in the process to kind of see what that would look like. In East Bay Township, we do have one area that is exempt from our short-term rental ordinance, and that's our regional business district, which happens along US 31. And if you've been through our chunk of US 31 over here in the Traverse City area, you'll know that that's known as kind of the Miracle Mile or the Beach District. It has a lot of hotels. It's a heavy use hotel area. So we excluded that particular geographical area for ease of administrative enforcement, because of the hotels like to list on there. We didn't want to affect that kind of economic corridor, as far as impeding the ability for rentals and tourism and things like that, since it historically has always been that way. But I think that's something we'll probably evaluate maybe later this year to see kind of, as we've dwindled down the number of licenses, what that impact has been.
Okay.
Does Charlevoix have full-term hotels like these? We just mentioned the area on 131. There's a good number of hotels there. Does Charlevoix?
So ours are a little different. We do have hundreds of what I would consider, I think most people would consider hotel units, but they are all condominiums. So they are large condominium complexes where everyone owns their own unit. But then they have a management company down at the front desk. So you go in there, it feels like a hotel, and it's treated like a hotel, but they're actually all individual owned units.
So do you know what percentage of transient spaces you have then of those 1,200 residential places?
So
What
we
kind of
don't,
transient traffic do you have?
So we don't consider those as part of those residential units. Our residential units are only single family homes that we regulate. So we're not regulating those units for similar reasons of what Sam spoke about.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
For both of you, but I'll start with Jonathan. Jonathan, you and I spoke in the fall, I think, after our short-term rental task force wrapped up. And one of the questions I asked was, I mean, a lot of the pushback we got when we talked about caps was especially from the real estate community, and that it would crater home prices and really cause disruption there. And you had indicated then that was not the case. You didn't experience that. I just want to make sure I heard you right there and see if you have any color to add, and then kick it over to Sam to see if they've had any, disruption of the housing prices and.
So I would believe, I would say it's quite the opposite in Charlevoix. So Charlevoix, and I don't know how Sagatuck is, but Charlevoix is only 30% of our homes are year-round houses, and 60% are second homes. And the short-term rental licenses play a big factor. I get 1 or 2 calls a week on, we want to buy a second home in Charlevoix, but we really can't afford it. We can short-term rental it, we can afford it. And so it really does promote second home purchases if they can get a license. What we've found and what studies are showing now is that the value potentially goes up about 20%. And we have, and why I hesitate a little bit on that is our licenses are non-transferable. So when somebody sells their house, the license comes back to us, and then the city puts that out for on the top of the waiting list. So, and we wanted to make sure they did that because we wanted to make sure that a house doesn't ever permanently become that short-term rental, and that value, that minimum of 20%, and I would guess even more if you had a license that stayed with the property. So, but studies, what I'm seeing is national studies right now, most places that have short-term rentals, prices go up anywhere 10 to 20%, not down.
Yeah, I would echo that it has not negatively affected our housing market here. We also are close proximity to Traverse City, which is a pretty large urban area. And so we're directly adjacent to them. So we get a lot of the overflow, but our community's a bedroom community for the most part, and is older and permanent residents. And I would argue that what has happened is that we've allowed for more sales of homes to have permanent residents live in them, which is helpful. I have seen that when people are misconstrued that a license will transfer at the sale of a property, because we do not allow a license to transfer at the sale of the property. That license is terminated and does no longer exist. The new homeowner would have to apply for a new license. That, they've had to adjust the price of the sale of the home accordingly when they've listed it at one price. But I would argue that brings it down to the current market rate price versus kind of an artificially inflated price saying that a license will transfer. And we do not do a wait list. So first come, first serve. And so it does allow for a little bit more of a competitive nature for those licenses, and someone who have to plan pretty appropriately to get that license, because there's a lot of people that have called asking.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got it. I think just one, and I'd like for both of you. Let's start with Jonathan. I'm not clear on, and I think Sam just said first come, first serve. I'm not quite clear on if you've got X number of applicants and a lesser number of permits available. Did you take the ones that already had them and grandfather them in automatically, or was there a citywide lottery, or was there a first come, first serve, whoever got to the city clerk's office first with their application? How did you decide which ones get the 80 or start off 40 or whatever it was licenses?
Right. So the cap was 80, and it took a year and a half to get all those licenses out. So there never was a waiting list. Somebody could walk to my office and get a license for a year and a half. Then once we hit that 80, then a waiting list started, and they pay $50, put them on a list. And when a license comes back to the city, then they would get that license. But again, from an administrative point of view, and from a policy of speculation, different things, I would love to see what East Bay is doing and not have a waiting list, because I still have people buying houses, second homes, speculating that we're going to get that short-term rental license. And, you know, there's, for us, again, it's that balance of, we don't have even close to enough homes for our citizens and their children and our workers and that type of thing. So that's another balancing act that we're trying to do.
Okay, before we get to Sam, Jonathan, is there anything in your ordinances dictating how, if there had been more applicants, or if there are more applicants than there were spots, the procedure? And it sounds
Yes.
to me it's first come, first serve on the waiting list?
It-
Or is there something actually
Nope,
in
nope,
your
you're-
ordinance?
No, you're absolutely right. When you get down into the details, our local citizens, year-round residents get first bite at that apple, both for the waiting list. They move up above anybody that doesn't have a PRE in the city. And so to really explain that is, if you have a house that's your PRE in the city, you could buy other houses and you go to the top of the list. So it's not your personal home, it could be additional homes. And so, and then for the original licenses, I didn't have to use it, but that also said, I have to give licenses to local PRE owners first. That didn't happen because, again, it took 1.5 years to fill that up.
Okay, thank you. Sam? Your
Yeah.
turn.
So we have implemented it as a first come, first serve basis. So whoever were to, you know, meet the criteria listed in our ordinance for application materials and submit all of those first, you know, time wise, either running into the offices here, or we intend on doing an online application that would open at you know, once we get below our cap, we would announce out to the public on this date at this time, the application opens. And kind of whoever gets us that first application with all of the required materials will receive the license. Administratively, as somebody who also spends about 20% of their time managing short-term rentals, it's very convenient to point to that when explaining to people, like, you know, we also have a universal renewal date. So that's also nice, is we can point to that and say, once November 1st happens, we'll know how many people have renewed, we'll know how many licenses we have, and if licenses are available, we'll message them out at that time. And so that kind of also, you know, reduces the number of calls and inquiries and things like that over time, because you are telling people that, you know, November 1st, keep an eye on the website, you know, sign up with the notifications, that kind of a thing. And then we don't have to keep track of a wait list of any kind.
All of your licenses renew on the same date? Is that what I just heard you say?
Yep, they have a universal renewal deadline of November 1st, and the application opens 30 days prior. So they have 30 days to get the required documents to us to renew.
Is that same thing true in Charlevoix?
It hasn't been, but now that inspections are out of the way, I would absolutely agree that that would be a better system. We originally didn't, or I originally didn't, because having to do 80. So what had happened was, we started this right in the middle of COVID, and the short-term rental program, the city council immediately said, you're not going to do inspections this year. So we ended up having all the inspections would have had to be done on January 1st. And we do not have the capacity to do that. So I spread it out over the original date of when they got their license.
Thank you.
Jonathan, I just had one quick question for you about your number of licenses, those 80 business licenses. I know you
Right.
mentioned they're in the R1 and R2 districts.
Correct.
I was curious, how many homes do you count in those districts?
Well, so that's the 1,200
Oh, that's
single
the
family
1,200.
homes.
Okay.
Right, we
Yeah.
probably have, you know, if you add condominiums and you add apartments, because they did not regulate either of those, that probably doubles to triple the amount of units that we have. And so the other thing then that we have, and this maybe ties a little bit to the financial question, is we probably have closer to 300 short-term rentals in the summer that advertise, and these are only the ones that advertise on the Airbnb type of advertisements. We have hundreds more of those condominium units that don't advertise that way, that they're, again, more like the hotel.
Right.
So I would suggest that if you capped those condos, you would have a financial impact if you were to cap or pull back on those units in your city, yes?
Well, and I don't think it would be, yeah, it would be tough to do. It'd be like telling the Sheraton Hotel that they couldn't rent their rooms. So no, I don't think that is ever a possibility. But in your theory, yes, it would be devastating to somebody.
Yes.
But are those in the residential area?
No,
Those
no,
condos?
none of them are. They are all
They're in
in,
the city limits, but
Yeah,
they're in
but
the city, but they're in the city limits, right?
And it really is comparing apples to oranges because
Yep.
condominiums have associations that set up their own bylaws as to whether there are short-term rentals or not short-term
or
rentals
full-time hotels.
allowed
too.
within respect to that condominium. So the value of that condominium is dictated by the bylaws of the condominium association, not by any ordinance of the city with respect to short-term rentals.
Okay.
That-
Which is
to- you-
exactly why the city council did that, for that reason, because they're theoretically self-managed.
East Bay Township did similarly with the fact that we kind of fall back on the bylaws to dictate whether or not, in a neighborhood association, a short-term rental is allowed. And then along the beach district, they're exempt.
So I suggested or talk about it because Saugatuck has no full condos or the big condos or hotels like both your cities.
Okay, well, any other questions?
it's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you
Jonathan.
very
and
much.
Sam. This was incredibly helpful and we so appreciate your time.
If you
Yeah,
have
absolutely.
any other questions, feel free to reach out, and I'm sure I'll talk for Sam. I'm sure Sam and I would love to help you. We know some of the problems and continue to feel them. And if we can help you guys at all, that makes us feel better also.
Yes, I second that statement. Please feel free to reach out. Ryan has my contact information, so I'm happy to answer any questions if they come up after this.
Oh, that's
Thanks.
great. Thank you.
And our ordinance is available on our website, so feel free to take a look.
Right.
Oh, thank you. Okay, well, that was very helpful. Thank you. So I think we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is public comments on agenda items. Just a quick reminder, we are opening up a separate public hearing for 650 Water Street that will have separate public comment time within that. So I only mentioned that in case you want to think about that in terms of what you talk about, if anyone wants to talk now. So with that, I'll open it up to public comment on agenda items.
Hi, Nancy Kimball. I live at 550 Spear Street in Saugatuck City Limits. And I just wanted to speak on item 7C, short-term rentals, discussion of residential caps and pricing. And I think what the gentleman speakers just alluded to, they really said it all for me. They set their caps at 6% and 2.5% in their residential neighborhoods. Our residential neighborhoods are what, 30, 40% on the hill? It's a problem. And I could go into all the reasons. I think you already know what they are. But I just wanted to speak publicly and say how strongly I feel it's important that we implement those caps, and I urge you to do so.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Nancy.
you.
Hi, Jim Bauk, 638 Spear Street. I would like to speak in favor of caps and the distance regulation that these people talked about, so that there is a separation within the residential areas. What happens downtown is a separate issue, but within the residential areas, that would be very much appreciated. And if you look at the survey, the full-time residents have spoken very clearly. They would like to have caps in the residential areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Anyone else or anyone online? Oh, Steve, I think we'll turn it to you.
Hey, thanks. And again, I apologize for not being able to be there. It was all American Airlines issue, but few things that I would want to say thank you to the two gentlemen who spoke. I took some notes here and we'll be trying to follow up with Ryan and with each of them on a few questions that I had myself. Regarding tonight's agenda, when I went through kind of the packet, I just wanted to kind of say that I think that one, Ryan and the team have done an outstanding job in compiling information for the packet and writing up the ordinance that we're going to be reviewing, within the group. So I highly commend all the work that has gone into this and all the information that we had. And then unfortunately, Bobby and myself were not able to attend. Regarding the first item that you're going to be having, the site plan review, which I know has a public hearing, what I've kind of seen myself is that if I was there, I would be looking at it and kind of going along with the recommendation that's on page 18 with all those disclosures. But you may want to kind of consider the idea of having a barrier wall because there is quite a drop off where those 2 6-person tables would be. Regarding the short-term rental police powers, I've read through that. I think it's an excellent job, as I've already mentioned, on the preparation of that. There might be a few questions that will come up, from you as planning commissioners. They're there this evening. But overall, I would recommend the approval of that going to City Council for their review and approval of the police powers that we've already reviewed back in our previous month's meetings. And then in regards to the conversation that we had here this evening, I think you had already kind of discussed it on item C of the agenda. I would like to kind of have David do his presentation to the group, and then Bob and I would have a chance also to listen to it. But for any deliberation or kind of discussions as to how we would move forward, I would like to see it, and I can't control it, but I would like to recommend tabling that conversation and letting us discuss it at our February planning meeting so that everyone can have kind of an involvement as to how best to proceed with the concept of caps and parking. With that, I wish you all well, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Okay, well, I think with that, we'll move on to old business. There is no old business, so we'll move on to new business. And our first item under new business is 650 Water Street, a public hearing and site plan review for a proposed restaurant with expanded outdoor dining area and service of alcoholic beverages. And for that, we will open up a separate public hearing. We'll do that now and pass it over to Ryan for a summary.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And so before you this evening, as Madam Chair indicated, as a special land use request and site plan for a proposed restaurant at 650 Water Street. Essentially, a lot of the proposed, there's not any really significant, there's really no site improvements or really permanent site improvements that are extensive outside. There's an expanded outdoor dining area with some temporary furniture and those sorts of things. So a lot of the work is going to be internal. So we're not looking at an addition or onto this building or any way. They're going to be using the existing structure that's already there. Staff or consultant David Jurasik had provided you with kind of some comments and analysis related to the general standards for a special land use, site plan review, and then design standards that relate specifically to expanded outdoor dining. And they're also going to have some alcohol service that's proposed. So a quick evaluation of those items as well. So it's probably best that I turn it over to the applicants, Ms. Alec and Lindsay Payleitner, is that? All right. I apologize if I said it incorrectly. I know they're excited for their project. They'll probably be familiar to you. They've owned another restaurant in the community previously. I'll let them, I don't want to steal their thunder in presenting their application, and I'm happy to follow up with any questions. I will comment quickly on the comment that Chair Manzin mentioned during his public comment on the railing. I did talk with reached out to our city engineer He did concur that he felt that a railing along that section that near the water at the Spear Street end there would be appropriate. He did have some concerns as well as it related to Water Street in that, some of the sidewalk space, right up next to the building was going to be taken by the seating. And then there was an extra sidewalk along Water Street. He had some concerns that cars, when they pull up, pull up and their bumpers over the actual sidewalk area. And so he had some concerns about whether a 5-foot wide space might be able to be maintained there, and suggested, some sort of something to address that particular issue that might arise as well. So we can have some further discussion on that. So.
Great. Thank you.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, thanks for your time this evening. My name is Alec Payleitner.
I'm Lindsay.
And as mentioned, we're here to talk about a proposed new restaurant project at 650 Water Street, site of the former River Market Deli. Lindsay and I have owned and operated Grow Cafe and Bistro right up the block here since 2016. And it was a great run. We ended what we like to think at the top of our game, and we're very grateful to have been part of the culinary expansion of our town over the past 8 years. But all restaurants have a lifespan. And at this time, we're hoping to bring our experience and our love for this town, quite frankly, to a new project.
So the concept is a fast casual, family-friendly, budget-conscious eatery that features Tex-Mex inspired food, soft serve ice cream concoctions, and a kind of fun array of both non-alcoholic and alcoholic beverages. We've known and been customers of the space at 650 Water Street for years. In fact, our very first home in Saugatuck was a winter rental, exactly 1 block east on Butler. And with the recent focus on revitalizing, regulating, and rezoning the waterfront, we're excited about the future of this corridor, and we know we can have a positive impact on our business community and the tourist experience.
You've had the chance to look at the application materials, and I just want to touch on some key points and then answer any questions you might have. But in particular, in regards to how David Jurasik, the consultant, formulated his memorandum, he kind of systematically structured it into 4 different things that we're focusing on. So the site plan, the special land use approval, the expanded outdoor dining area, and then the standards for alcohol service. So I just want to touch on a couple points in each of those particular things. As Ryan mentioned, since the building is already in existence, a lot of the site plan stuff is not applicable. I do want to mention that our plans to build a inconspicuous 4-foot fence on the south side of the building to hide the refuse containers. There's nothing at this time for those. And it is also worth mentioning that in the plans for the restaurant, we're going to be using all compostable eatware and drinkware. And so that eliminates much of the waste of a typical restaurant. And it also eliminates our need for a large scale dumpster with the limited space there as well. So the second piece in the assessment was the special land use standards, what we're going to be doing. And we are incredibly excited to bring this dining option to locals and visitors. We think that a chef-driven, fast casual restaurant with a fun environment, consistent takeout availability, and the option to make use of Saugatuck's social district will add to the hospitality scene and not replace any of our great existing establishments. Some of the comments in the memorandum that I just want to bring to light, but David said that the use will add vibrancy to the downtown area. He said that the investment will add value to the property. And we're always concerned about parking. And he actually mentioned that the open parking spaces around will be used for takeout. But in a way, that's a positive because those takeout customers results in faster turnover of the parking spots. Onto the expanded outdoor dining area. So the third part of it, our plans as outlined in the application packet are offer 30 additional seats to the east and then to the north of the building. The seats to the north will have direct waterfront views, and that's using a really untapped piece of just simple concrete that's just there. And we'd be using it for the enjoyment of our guests and Saugatuck's guests. And we have talk of the barrier here, so obviously that's something that kind of has come up, and obviously safety is paramount. The seats to the east, so in front of the building, would make use of, if you can kind of see in the top picture, there's a fairly unique second sidewalk, a second narrower sidewalk right up against the building, and then the large entryway sidewalk. The red arrows there indicate the 5-foot public walkway, at least 5-foot public walkway, that, would take around the sign, past the boat launch and onto the Star of Saugatuck property, so people can follow that around. The furniture will be vibrant, sleek metal furniture designed for all weather, easily mobile. It is important to note that none of our outdoor intentions are permanent fixtures at all. Outdoor dining is definitely a staple of the Saugatuck dining scene. And with our plan, we're making use of existing concrete and 0 parking spaces. None of that is affected. What the guest experience looks like with the outdoor dining, guests will order at a counter indoors, receive their food in their aforementioned compostable packaging, and then help themselves to the tables. And as they help themselves to the tables, they're actually without any of the time or any of the service restrictions of traditional full-service restaurants.
We thought this was a good time, as ever, just to mention that we will still be bringing our gratuity-free mission, which we started at Grow in 2022, to our new project. We do believe in paying our staff a livable wage and not asking for additional compensation from our guests. So there'll be no flipping screens at the checkout for that tip flip. We deliver excellent service and hospitality because that's what we do. The final piece of the assessment deals with the responsible service of alcohol. And while we will offer, delicious frozen margaritas, local canned beers, ciders, and specialty summery cocktails, we are definitely not a bar. All drinks will be offered in social district ready cups for casual, slow sipping at our tables, or else they can be taken throughout town while they shop our shops. Our hours will not be running late into the night. We are definitely a restaurant, and when the dinner rush is over, so are we.
And that kind of concludes our statements today. With your help, we can bring something fun and exciting that's for everyone. And thank you for your time again and listening to us tonight.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, well, with that, we will open up the public comment portion. The first public comment portion of the public hearing, I will mention. You'll have another opportunity at the end if anyone has comments. But what we'll start with is comments from anyone who supporting comments. So supporting comments both from the audience as well as letters. And I don't think we had anything in writing on this, did we?
That's correct, Madam
Okay.
Chair. No correspondence.
Okay, thank you. So supporting comments. Okay. Opposing comments? Oh, yeah, we should.
I'll make sure
Yeah,
we don't miss
sorry.
any-
We'll
Yeah,
we'll go
everybody-
back to supporting in case anyone raised their hands. Okay.
All right.
Opposing comments? Seeing none. General comments? Okay, and repeat comments are not applicable, given that we didn't have any initial comments. So with that, I will close the public comment portion of the hearing, since we had none, either from the audience or in writing in the form of letters, and open the floor to commission deliberation. And if anyone would like to kick off with thoughts or questions.
I guess you're shy all of a sudden.
Well, I didn't want to go first. I'm supportive. They did a great job at Grow. I feel like they'll do another fine job here. So I'm supportive. There's not a lot of questions. The protective barrier at the waterfront, at water's edge, I think is important
Mhm.
and should be considered as a requirement as well.
Yeah, I thought this was a great packet. It was really comprehensive and so nice work on pulling all the materials together. And likewise, thought you did a great job at Grow, and excited that you're going to a new venture. So
Yeah, I'll weigh in as well. I'm definitely supportive of the concept and, other than the discussion around potentially the barrier, which I think is important from a safety perspective. it looks reasonable. But to that end was the suggestion to put the barrier along the west edge along the river or along the boat ramp to the north?
So the boat ramp to the north, I think is the concern because of
Because of the
just
potential.
the narrows.
distance.
Yep.
Because it's kind of behind what would be the chairs, is that
Site
the
plan backup.
thinking? You might,
So yeah, so where the chairs are at and the tables are at, let's pull up a photo here. So I'm always a visual person,
Oh, yeah.
so, and if you go up, Sarah, go up,
Being fast.
there you go. Yep.
Slides
So you
up.
can kind of see the area that they have lines on, they're kind of showing that dining area to the north. And they're showing that they're maintaining a 5 foot, space, but that's still narrow. We wouldn't want somebody to get, bumped easily, or maybe somebody, backs up out of a chair and doesn't realize somebody's behind them. So so the engineer definitely concurred with Mr. Jurassic's concerns with that. And if that's a condition of the planning commission, certainly we'll work with the owners on that being installed and working out costs and that sort of thing.
Okay.
so just on a more just kind of a housekeeping type note, if we made that a condition, it could be administratively, some kind of barrier, it could be administratively dealt with.
Correct.
With you.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And I assume it'll have to meet historical commission. Whatever they look for.
Yeah, yeah. Basically anything impacting the exterior is something they're going to take a look at. So yep, they would take a look too.
I'll demonstrate some ignorance here. There's no easement on the property for the boat ramp, I take it, or? 'Cause I
On
know
the-
that stretch is used by people to go and they fender off their boats and everything.
That's a good point. I'm not sure if they're. I mean, it's a city launch. Obviously, it's public space right now that's that goes along there. So that would remain accessible to somebody if they needed to, I think, walk along there to that dock and manage their boat. I mean, is 5 foot space, enough to still allow somebody the maneuverability to assist with the boats? I mean,
I'm sorry, so my question was more in the context of where the protective barrier would go, whether it would be within the 5 foot,
I see.
inside the 5 foot,
Yeah.
or outside the 5 foot. That was kind of my question, but.
On the seawall or on the inside of the 5 foot?
Right.
Yeah. So that's something that, like I said, one of the suggested conditions is to secure all applicable approvals from city departments, the fire department, and applicable outside agencies. So if you're comfortable with that, we can work with our city engineer to kind of find the best solution and take that into account.
Okay.
So if we were to make a motion to approve, we could essentially say what is in the packet on looks like page 18, adding the barrier along the boat ramp to the north. And then Ryan, what was your comment on Spear Street earlier? I didn't catch all of that.
Well, on Water Street. So you can
Water
see
Street,
the
okay.
sidewalk on the eastern portion of the property there near the parking spaces.
Yep.
The concern from the city engineer was that, there's not, the cars will pull up and their bumpers will stick over the sidewalk. And so
Got it.
concern about whether or not a 5 foot, sidewalk is truly being maintained there or not. And that by having the seating area right up against the building that, you're kind of taking that route away and looking at ways that we can prevent traffic from covering that sidewalk and keeping it accessible.
But that's applicable to that entire strip of diagonal parking spaces. I mean, you could argue that anywhere along Water Street where there's diagonal parking, right? I mean, there's nothing.
There's other areas that you certainly, in this particular case with this particular site, there is a sidewalk against the building that would allow somebody to, if they needed to get around or had a concern with a vehicle blocking their passage, that they have more options with this particular site. But I understand your concern that there's others that would have similar issues.
I'm sure the city engineer nor you are asking to penalize the potential owners of this property, developers of this property by restricting seating on their own property when we have many, many businesses that have seating in our public sidewalks.
Well, the seating's not on their property, the seating's on the city property. So when a requirement of.
This yellow is city property?
Correct.
Both sidewalks are
Yeah,
city
that's
property,
my
City owns the
understanding.
sidewalk.
Right.
both of them. in this case.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that. Where does their property line begin?
It's built right out to the property lines.
They build up to the property line.
Right.
Oh, so the
Okay.
zero setback, I guess, that used to
Right.
exist, okay.
Thank you. I didn't understand that. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, you can see it. It's kind of hard to see on here. It's a darker line that, yeah, so.
So Ryan, how would you word that in a motion?
Well, I think, well, it's up to you. I mean, there's two ways. You could specifically mention, you know, to install, a railing as recommended by, the engineer, or I think your condition related to secure all other applicable approvals from city departments, the fire department, applicable outside agencies would satisfy.
Okay.
The engineer has looked at this, it would have to satisfy, his approval before it's good to go. So it's up to you. You can either specifically mention it or leave it broad to make sure that the concerns that the engineers brought up are addressed.
I guess my comment in regards to the sidewalk issue. If I understand the potential concern is that cars pull up over the, potentially restrict the outer sidewalk, which is the case for their neighbors as well. So, I mean,
Yeah, it's
I
curious.
don't,
Looking at the picture, which I see, it's interesting. It looks, I'm looking at a photo in person, which is a little bit more three-dimensional, I guess, than on the screen. It looks like there's actually a curb.
Yeah, there's.
Do cars pull up over a curb or is there no curb?
there is a curb.
Yeah.
And car bumpers do,
Oh, I see the
frequently go
bumper,
over.
sure. Yeah, I see.
Um,
Okay.
which they do on the neighboring property
Yeah,
as well.
I see.
And there is no alternate sidewalk, I don't believe, over there.
Right.
I guess that's a long way of saying I don't really have an issue with the proposal to put the seating out there. I guess that's.
Other, are we ready for
Yeah,
motion?
so any other comments? I don't know. One thing does anyone have, I know there were a number of other recommendations in the memo. I don't know if anyone wanted to talk about any of those. If not, I think that's fine.
It seems like the 5 points in the under the recommendation section in the memo. I mean, if we had a motion that covered, that just read those 5 points, is that, that gets us what we need?
And then the barrier issues
And
on
we could
both
add that,
areas
yeah.
would be covered by the applicable outside agencies, which is the engineer. Is that the thinking? We did that?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And do we need two different motions, one for site plan and one for
Nope, you
special use?
can make it all one motion, so.
And
But the motion should reference both?
Yeah, it's right here.
that was one question I had too about the wording of the recommendation. It said for special land use and site plan request, but would we need to list out the restaurant use, the parking, the alcohol, or could we just say special land use and site plan?
So, I mean, there, you can reference the submittal, and what you're
Okay.
approving, as submitted. You certainly can get more detailed than that, and your city attorney can advise if you want something even cleaner.
I think just basically stating that the presented site plan is being approved. And if you want to mention that the special land use approval is for a restaurant and outdoor seating, I think that'd be appropriate as
And
well.
and the alcohol, because I think it's 3 special land uses were approved.
Yeah, I think it'd be wise to identify all 3 of those special land uses in the
Okay.
motion.
And they are restaurant?
Restaurant with expanded outdoor dining area and service of alcoholic beverages.
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion that the Planning Commission approve the the special land use application for a restaurant, expanded outdoor dining and the serving of alcoholic beverages, and the site plan request from the same applicant for, make sure I have the right number, 605 Water Street, with the following, 650, excuse me. With the following conditions that the applicant provide light fixture specification sheets for review and administrative approval. If new exterior lighting will be installed, that the applicant also provide signage information for administrative sign permit review and approval, that they also secure all other applicable approvals from city departments, the fire department, and the applicable outside agencies, that they also secure historic district commission approval as applicable. Also provide item number 5, provide all expanded outdoor dining area checklist items in accordance with section 154.092, paren 0, and paren 2, and paren B, paren license agreement fees, certificates of insurance, MLCC license, food service license, lighting attestation, and payment attestation. And finally, item 6, that for administrative approval and potentially historic commission approval, the construction of a barrier on the north side of the outdoor dining adjacent to the boat ramp.
Okay.
Second. Sorry. Can you repeat that?
Very impressive. Any discussion? Then we'll take, do we want to do?
I'll second,
Oh.
then I believe it needs to be seconded.
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I snuck one in there.
Happy.
Do we want to do a roll call vote? Okay, we will do a roll call vote.
Anderson,
Yes.
Patrick,
Yes.
Broker,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Lachey.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Go with God, as they say.
Yeah, thank you, Alec and Lindsay. We're very excited, I think. I can speak for everyone by saying we're very excited about this
Yeah,
new
but-
restaurant.
Are you trying to do it for this season or I see, yay, great.
Wonderful.
Taking reservations tonight?
Okay, and then with that, we'll close the public hearing. And we will go back to the new business under item 7, and we will move on to item 7B, short-term rentals, review draft zoning, noise, and police powers ordinance language, which begins on page 45 of our packets. Ryan, I might pass this off to you for some
all right.
context, if that's okay.
All right. Well, thank you again, Madam Chair. And so as you recall, you had a lengthy discussion at your last meeting regarding the short-term rental task force recommendations. And you kind of worked through each of those recommendations and discussed them amongst yourselves to see which items there was some consensus on. And so there was some tweaks to the recommendations. And what staff had indicated was that as another reminder, there's been a recommendation from staff and that we kind of modify the zoning ordinance and remove a lot of the short-term rental items out of it and place it in a police powers ordinance. So we kind of have a couple different paths here where we're the city council asked the planning commission to also kind of provide some recommendations on that police powers ordinance. So before you this evening is a police powers ordinance, a draft, still subject to suggestions and changes and in a final form. It's for your discussion this evening. That would regulate short-term rental activities throughout the city and provide for a licensing mechanism. There's some zoning ordinance amendments that kind of correspond that essentially remove some of the certificate requirements that would have been applicable before and currently kind of removes those items from the zoning ordinance. And then staff had indicated that, you know, there was a few items of cleanup that we felt we've been kind of working through some issues and felt some more clarity was needed in your zoning ordinance related to accessory dwelling units and what's allowed to occur with those. And then and then the third item that's there is a proposed update to the police powers ordinance that relates to noise. And so a lot of the language cleanup is related to recent case law and court decisions to make that more defensible. So going through each one, I'm not going to kind of read to you all of the changes. I am happy to do that if you feel like there's benefit to that, but I trust all of you have done your homework. So a lot of basically what's here are kind of items that really were consensus items for you. A couple of them that I would point out that you haven't discussed yet that were kind of a suggestion from staff as we were in legal and our planning consultant as we were sharing drafts back and forth. There was some discussion at your last meeting about occupancy and, how do we enforce occupancy? Because the occupancy that's set is really a sleeping occupancy. So one possible way that you could do that is to have some sort of a visitor maximum where you set visitor occupancy essentially and maybe set parameters on when visitors could be at a particular property. What's before you is a suggestion that be at, a factor of 1.5 and kind of correspond to your noise ordinance hours. Again, you could keep that. You could choose to do something different. You could choose to take it out completely. So that's an item for discussion. A little bit of a change to the trash piece. I think there was some discussion about maybe 2 recycling bins. Maybe a little further discussion amongst yourselves would be good on whether or not 1 might be sufficient, especially if staff's able to successfully negotiate twice monthly pickup, while keeping in mind that contract is up until October, so it may take some time for that to occur. One piece I do want to point out here is that there is an intent to grandfather certificates that were issued under the zoning ordinance until those certificates expire. And then once a previously issued short-term rental certificate expires, the certificate holder must receive a short-term rental license under this new ordinance. So what we're saying essentially is if you're granted a short-term rental certificate under the zoning ordinance and you have 2 years left on it, you get to continue that short-term rental certificate for the 2 years that it runs. Once it expires, when you will then be subject to a new annual license requirement. So that's important, I think, to point out. I did talk with the fire department about occupancy a little bit. So it seems like and I can read you exactly what they sent, but essentially the feedback from them was that, they would be maybe perhaps open to maybe some sort of grandfathering in related to occupancy, if the planning commission felt that was a concern. But it seemed like their biggest concern actually was more so related to kind of these extra like 2 per floor type situations. And so they really were kind of focused in on wanting something that's maybe 2 per bedroom. So when we get to that point, I'll read you more specifically their statement on that. Another key piece here to point out with the police powers ordinance is that essentially licenses can't be transferred. And I think you heard that, from your guest speakers today, that essentially it doesn't transfer to a new owner. And so there's kind of a lot of different scenarios that to think about there. And so there's some proposed language that's, pretty strict before you this evening, something to consider, especially if, at some point you were to be looking at some sort of cap that would be even more applicable. So on the zoning ordinance side, again, we're not changing anything, I think, related to accessory dwelling units and how they can be rented. You can either rent the accessory dwelling unit and the single family dwelling together under single contract. You can owner occupy and ask for special land use approval to rent your ADU separately, but in no case, essentially, can you have an ADU and a single family dwelling rented to separate parties on the same property. So, there's some ordinance language cleanup, but it's also, I think, a little tricky too to read through. So, we're all ears if you have any thoughts on that. And then another issue that's kind of come up at times in the certain zoning districts is that commercial zoning districts is that certainly from a development perspective, you want to kind of encourage commercial storefront uses on your kind of traditional Main Street, Water Street, Culver. So we have situations where, so as it stands today, an apartment or a dwelling can really only be on the 2nd or 3rd floor, and that makes sense. But we have situations where we have kind of historical buildings or sites where we maybe have storefronts that are on the actual Main Street like you would expect, but then there's kind of a single family dwelling or structure behind. And because the short-term rental wouldn't be wholly located on the second or third floors as the ordinance requires, they're not eligible to be short-term rented. And so we've run into some issues there and enforcement issues there, and some of those folks have had concerns. So what's before you is basically a proposed change to say that if you do have a single-family dwelling or a residential building essentially behind a more commercial use, and it's not actually, and that dwelling isn't actually fronting on the street, that they would be eligible to actually have a short-term rental in those commercial districts. There's a little bit of cleanup, I think, that I talked with legal about on that, just to kind of clarify what primary street means, maybe either defining that, or just want to make sure that we are clear on maybe corner lots and what we mean by that. And then for the noise ordinance, there's been some different hours thrown out there about what quiet hours the community has. Some people thought it was 10 p.m. Some people thought it was 11 p.m. The ordinance says 11 p.m. So maybe a conversation for discussion of whether or not you think that should be different or remain as is. So that's a very high level overview. We're here for your questions. Essentially, the process tonight, the zoning ordinance is going to require, amendments are going to require a public hearing. So if you're comfortable with the zoning ordinance amendments, we're going to schedule a public hearing next month. It's not to say that you still can't make changes next month. And then with the police powers ordinance, if you have suggestions on changes, we can kind of bring that back to you for your review next month as well. It won't be necessarily a formal public hearing, but certainly public comments could be taken in the normal course of practice. And then you could potentially make a recommendation on both at your meeting next month.
And then Ryan, the noise ordinance, is that a zoning? Does that fall into the zoning category?
Nope.
No.
Nope. It's a separate.
Okay.
Yep.
Would we need to have a hearing on that as well?
Nope.
Okay, that could just be recommended to council.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, what I might suggest, just, by the way, this is amazing work. Thank you so much. It really,
Yes.
really amazing.
Absolutely.
Work that. you did.
Phenomenal work.
Yeah. I am, my thought, but I welcome other thoughts if anyone thinks there's a better approach, is just to kind of tick through the bullets. I think not to lengthen things, but to keep it somewhat organized, our discussion. And then I imagine a number of them, we may not have any questions, but go through them in an orderly, at least.
Are we're not approving each one individually?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was thinking for the discussion.
Discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, but so that we could, just so we're not, just because my thought was just there's so much content that way. We're not jumping around. But I welcome other thoughts if anyone has a different approach, I think would work.
No, I
better.
think that's
Okay. Okay, so we'll start with the police powers ordinance for short-term rentals. So the first one was an annual license and inspection for each short-term rental. If there were any questions?
And when I see that, I think that's both the city approval, the licensing here, but also the fire inspection.
Yep.
And we don't know what that cost impact is at this point before. We wouldn't know the cost impact before that recommendation gets made.
I think,
So I can tell you that, I've asked the fire department, we're evaluating all of our costs, and some of that's going to depend on what the ordinances are, and then potential like third-party support, and what those costs are going to be. So total all-in cost of an annual license, correct. You're not going to know that tonight, but I do know that the fire department costs in general, they're looking to recoup more of their costs, and they're looking at a fee increase in their charge to the city.
Okay, but I'm comfortable if we have recommendation, probably an evaluation of the cost is something that if we had that type of wording. I
So
would
the
be more
ordinance right
comfortable
now, I think the cost of those inspections would be rolled into the application fee, and the application fee is established by resolution of the city council. So that's something that can be amended from time to time as those costs change.
oh, so if, just as an example, the fire department is charging the city $200 for each inspection, would be a line item that could be on the,
Yeah, so
Paid for.
there's not like a set fee amount in the ordinance. So there's
Uh-huh.
no need to like adopt another ordinance amending this when those administrative costs change. It's just going to be something that's incorporated into the schedule of fees that the city maintains.
I see.
And
Okay.
updated from time to time as appropriate.
Okay. Okay.
I guess the part that I'm trying to understand better. So what I heard the fire department say, they were going to need to hire an additional person. Those charges would not only go against Saugatuck because they're tri-community, those charges would go against everyone, the Douglas Township and Saugatuck. And they would charge the city for something for each of these inspections. But that overall cost would not just be Saugatuck and our taxpayers, but our neighboring communities as well. Because
Right.
that's why I don't know what the cost is on that, but I could be wrong in that thought.
Well, not necessarily. If that person only spends, say the part-time, and they spend 20 hours a week doing Saugatuck inspections, there's no reason why Saugatuck Township and Douglas should pay for part of that person's salary.
I agree, but I didn't necessarily hear that from the fire chief of what their
Oh.
plan was. I heard him, he's needed to hire a full-time person is what I thought I heard him say. But that's
Right.
why I think before I would say city or city council to make this annual, no, they should understand what that impact is.
Mm-hmm.
Is-
I got a couple questions. Does and this is prompted by, I want to say it was the Charlevoix guy, who said that they have 2-year inspections and that's too frequent in their opinion. And I may have, it may be wrong, maybe Sam. So my question is if we kept an annual application fee or license fee, excuse me, if we kept an annual license fee, do we need to necessarily also have an annual inspection? Are those two necessarily tied together?
So they don't have to be. The fire department's the one that's recommending that you have annual inspections. So they're recommending going from the 3-year to 1 year. Now, if this rolls out and a similar experience, they have a similar experience that Charlevoix had, that like nothing's really changing. They're not really seeing it being, a need for it to have an inspection every year, then you certainly revisit updating this police powers ordinance to say, well, we're gonna, make inspections every 3 years, but still have an annual licensing process.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anything else on this one? If not, I do have a question on it to CJ's point, which is, and it's a bit procedural. I take it one of the things I understood we could do is not recommend any or all of these to city council this month and recommend changes, but I presume that also includes potentially the gathering of more information for next month's meeting. Did I understand
Well,
that?
there's more information that you would need to make a decision on making a recommendation.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I
yeah.
would say that and this is, I think I touched on this at the last meeting that, typically a planning commission don't, evaluate police powers related ordinances. And typically a planning commission isn't always, evaluating the cost factors. And so I understand that would be a natural thing for you to want to do. You certainly can make a note of that to the plan or to the city council. I think it's really more of a policy decision that they have to make on whether or not they want to recoup the city's costs for implementing a short-term rental program. And so far from them, I've heard a pretty clear policy direction that they want, the city staff to bring them something that recoups the city's costs for whatever the updated regulations are.
I, as a resident who doesn't have a short-term rental, think it is unfair to those of us in that category to in any way pay for a portion of the inspection fees for short-term rentals. And in that regard, and again, I really liked, I think it was Charlevoix who came right out and called these what they are. They're business licenses. And any business has a cost of doing business, which includes licensing, inspections, raw goods, cleaning services, whatever these short-term rentals may require. And that goes into not only the viability of that short-term rental, but also what they charge. And so maybe they have to raise their fees to cover the increased, if there's an increase in inspections. But that's part of the business model that each of these short-term rental owners need to calculate. And it should not be on the non-short-term rental owners' property bill, property tax bill.
I'm supportive of having it, but I just, to make the recommendation without them, just without having an analysis or even having a recommendation that they do an analysis is where I'm.
Right.
Annual, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the fire department was clear on that. I just think that cost could be something that should be looked at before that.
Mhm.
And I'm supportive of the licenses annually with an inspection on something less than that, based upon not trying to increase those costs to the whole area.
Mhm.
Yeah, facts are good.
Okay, yeah, no, that sounds good. Occupants, or anything else on that before occupancy?
So just to read you that statement from the fire department.
Yeah.
Just so you could have some discussion on that. So they asked how the planning commission was going to handle properties over the 12 maximum. They said it's the recommendation of Deputy Chief Mandels and Captain Bernhardy that we find a way to grandfather them in with conditions. For example, if they currently had a 7-bedroom that slept 14 and was approved for 14, we would allow that to be a grandfather to continue. Any current occupant loads that included couches, sleeper sofas, or more than 2 persons per bedroom would be reduced to the maximum of 2 per bedroom to calculate the maximum occupant load. So kind of a couple sides of the coin there, so.
So if I understand correctly, a current dwelling that has 7 bedrooms, the net is they would be grandfathered to 14? Or they would be grandfathered to whatever their existing capacity allotment is now?
I think they're saying that they want to make it straight 2, they believe it's best to
2
do
per
2 per bedroom. But they would be fine with something being
Going over
higher than the 12 if they have been historically, if it's only based on the bedroom calculation.
And grandfathered for the term of the license or grandfathered to the person who owns that house and keeps the license going?
Well, they didn't necessarily specify
Well, the
that, so.
ordinance would already, for existing certificates that are issued right now, the ordinance is
Right.
already written so that those certificates can continue in operation until they expire, subject to the regulations that exist now.
Okay.
So if there's any additional grandfathering taking place, then my assumption would be that they're saying it would be in perpetuity.
So I have a short-term rental that has 14 people, I'm licensed to have 14 people. As long as I have that license, that would,
Right.
okay.
To add to that, though, sorry, really quickly, the licenses under this draft regulation aren't transferable.
Right.
So it's not a
For the
nonconformity, if you
property,
will, that will exist forever. It's just going to exist under that ownership.
So I'm going to weigh in on what I think his intent was, because I like it. The problem is some of, and I'm going to give them a name, bunkhouses, where they're putting a bunch of bunk beds in one room, where if that's 1 bedroom, fire department's intent is to limit it to 2 per bedroom. So that there's not a 4-bedroom that's puts a bunch of beds in a room and becomes a 14-person
Got it.
place. So I'm supportive of the 2 per room type rule just going forward, rather than the 12 max.
Well, speaking as a former member of the short-term task force, there was a couple of different objectives in making the recommendation. One of them was fueled by the concerns for the safety coming out of the fire department, the fire chief specifically, and the other was the perception that a lot of the nuisance complaints are coming from homes that have a large number of occupants in them. So that was all part of, if I remember correctly, it was all part of the same discussion where the fire department pretty much came in and said, if you're asking me or the fire chief, 12 should be your cap. And that's how we settled in on 12.
Yeah, I'm supportive of a 12 cap, and I mean, if we need to grandfather people in that have what they have until, but I don't think we should write in I mean, the 12, I don't think we should have a cap higher than 12 for new going forward.
Well, based upon what the fire chief has said here, I think there's at least some discrepancy between that original statement and what he said here. So I would love for some clarification to that if we could get that from the fire.
I don't
chief.
think they're against the 12 recommendation. They're just trying to take into account that some folks have been operating with a higher occupancy, and
Sure.
should you consider that? So I think they're still on their recommendation of 12 ultimately. That's-
Okay, that's, but at the same time allowing for the 14, for the example given.
For, to grandfather 14, not to, not to,
Perpetuity of that property.
no, not the property for the license.
Oh.
I mean,
that's not
so
what I
if-
heard.
So the licenses aren't transferable.
Correct, so it.
And so
it's-
to the extent it's grandfathered, that grandfathering status would apply to the license, not the property.
So at the end of the 2 years that's left now, or every year, at the end of 1 year, it would then expire?
No, when you sell the house, the
Not
license,
transferable, but you have to get a new one every year, so it's,
so as long as you have the house, you
Okay.
get the 14
okay.
people.
No, I,
You sell the house,
Yep.
it goes away. That,
Yeah, although the licenses renew every year, it's still the same license.
okay.
Okay. So,
So
this does raise a question I have in my mind, Ryan, as we're going through these. Are we gonna need to take a vote to send this to the city council? And I ask that because if we have some differing views on some of these, we probably need to vote on them individually. If
Well, I think eventually you're going to vote on a recommendation on an entire police powers ordinance.
Okay,
and
okay. The whole,
The nature of
okay.
a public body is that you gotta kind of get a final draft and hopefully you can make a recommendation
Got it.
in either way on, yep.
Okay.
And to repeat what if I don't mind asking you to repeat, the police power ordinance, we do not need to have a public hearing on. But the zoning ordinance changes is the one we do.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think then the question on occupancy is, do we want to leave it as is in the current drafting or recommend that staff make changes to it? Or,
I think it's fine as I'm looking at it.
I,
Okay.
agree.
me too.
I feel the
Okay.
same way. Yep.
okay, then we'll move on to visitor maximum. Any comments, questions, or
I thought
concerns?
that was really a smart, I really thought that was smart,
Yeah.
adding that.
I agree.
It's these guys here, so
Yeah.
that one was there, so.
Thank you. Next is advertising.
No changes to the,
Oh,
you're
yeah,
fine
no,
with the
just
factor, the times, I mean, if you,
Go ahead.
that is a change, I mean.
I don't have anything to add. I'm surprised that we would want to do that. I would be against that personally.
Limiting how many visitors can.
Yes. During non-quiet hours, I can't have a big party at my house.
If you're a short-term runner.
Yeah.
Boy, I sure would love to see that in place as somebody who has lots of people partying.
Those are the people that like to go down to the new restaurant at 650 Water.
Yeah, but at the same time, they're also party houses are getting established in these residential neighborhoods and it's being very disruptive. And we've heard countless, stories from the residents that have come in throughout the short-term, rental task force meetings and voice concerns. I think it's a very smart thing to put in there and would be supportive of it.
The thing I like about it is that it gives, if someone were to call and the sheriff's deputy shows up, there's a concrete way for the sheriff's deputy to enforce, say, the noise ordinance by doing a head count, not only the hour of the day, but a head count and say, okay, this party exceeds our ordinance, party ends, or it's 11:30, party ends.
And actually, it could send people to the bars to party at the bars and then they can come back to and spend money and then come back to their homes and sleep it off.
At face value, I actually agree, to a certain extent that, if it was my house, if I want to have a bunch of people over, but what we see in practice is that you have a group of people come in, throw a party, then you have another group and you get these weeks in a row where it's just continuous. And that's, I think, what we're trying to ultimately avoid. And draw a line and get some balance in place.
And again, this is just in residential. I mean, no, actually, that's not just in residential.
Correct. This would
Got it.
apply
To everybody.
Oh.
Yep, yep.
to activity in every
So-
short-term rental. Yeah.
And it's no different. The 11 PM is no different than what bars have to do. They've got to quiet down there's
This is,
outdoor music.
this is throughout the day, anytime in the day is the way I read it.
What?
The visitors, I could,
Oh,
I could
oh,
only, if I had 10, I could only have 15 people any time of the day. From 7 to 11, and then after quiet hours, I can only have the 10 that I'm occupancy, sleeping hours, possibly. Correct, that's.
I was kind of focusing on the noise on the
So-
part.
I
get you.
I
That's
think
an interesting point.
Sure, yeah. I'm okay with talking about that in the noise part, but as far as from 7 to 10, I can only have, if I have occupancy of 6, I can have 9 people.
Yeah, and
Plus the 6.
No. I can only have 9, 1.5 times. That's the way I read it. I could only have 9 people over. Oh, is it 1.5 visitors or 1.5?
Yeah,
good question. I
so
thought
if you had 6, it would be, you could have 9 visitors in those
So
hours.
15 total.
Yes.
Okay,
And-
I read that different. I read it was 1.5 total.
No.
So if you had like
Multiplied by a factor 1.5.
12 people, that means you can have 18 visitors.
That's a lot of visitors.
Are you 30?
30.
Well, and the factor of 1.5 is kind of a, I mean, that's a placeholder. So if that seems high or low, certainly we would defer
Okay.
to the planning commission.
so can I just clarify, this though extends beyond just short-term rentals?
No.
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 This
No,
would just be
short-term rentals, okay.
for short-term rentals. And it limits when you can
Okay.
have visitors.
Okay.
And I mean, the way it's kind of intended to function is it dovetails into that capacity
Right.
limitation. And I think from an enforcement standpoint, it makes it a lot easier to have a number, not just, okay, who's spending the night, but how many people total can be here. So we don't have to figure out what
Mhm.
everyone's overnight plans are.
Right. Okay.
So that's where like having discussions related to the factor does. If you're going to keep it, I mean, like I said, the number can change, like Jake said, so
Okay.
if you want it to be a 1-to-1 ratio, a factor of 1. So
Any changes to this one then, or?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, fine.
The next one, all advertising will have to reference the license number.
I'm supportive.
That one seems easy.
We
Yes,
got-
I like that one.
Next.
Next. Still, another hopefully easy one, still required to comply with zoning. Seems reasonable.
I don't know
Nice period.
why was that included? What was the purpose of that one? Still comply with zoning. It always complied with zoning, right?
So I think some of the idea there is that if you had a property that has an outstanding zoning violation, that
Oh.
would be grounds to not issue a short-term rental license.
Okay.
Support.
Okay. Okay, and the next one is this posting of rules and regulations, name of the license holder and or local agent responsible, et cetera, you know, so basically contact information of someone who can be reached on a 24-hour basis. A notification of the maximum number of overnight occupants, a copy of the noise ordinance, notification that an occupant and or visitor of an occupant may be cited for violation, and a copy of the Good Neighbor Guide. So that is providing and posting that information on a short-term rental.
Check. Good.
Okay, yeah,
Yep.
okay. Trash. I know that's one that Ryan, you suggested we might want to discuss. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on trash.
Yeah, so in recycling, I think I think the trash is great. I worry that higher occupied short-term rentals have recycling issue. I mean, there's just not enough recycling and
Mhm.
October is along, I mean, that kind of is at the end of the next season. I have forgotten, Ryan, where we are at maybe putting some recycle bins in places where people can take recycling. Is that happening?
as to like a bulk.
Yeah, I know that, I think Scott was looking into that,
Gotcha.
maybe.
He may be, I'm not aware of the status on like
Okay.
a bulk collection. We are going to work on highlighting this summer some recycling options throughout, commercial areas, but.
Okay. I do think, I'm fine with this for now, I guess. Because it addresses at least trash, but I think longer term, we need to address recycling both from a sustainability perspective. Shout out to Grow for compostable stuff. But I think we need to address that somehow. And if we could come up with an interim solution. Again, I don't, I don't know what that would be.
Yeah, no, you're right, because the recycling fills up so quickly for one person or two people in my household.
I fill
Yeah.
up mine, I live alone and fill up mine every month, so.
Yeah.
But that's a citywide thing more than just an STR
True.
thing.
Absolutely.
I'm
True.
supportive of what's written here.
Okay.
I am too.
Okay, okay. All rooms in a dwelling unit must be rented under a single contract. So no individual renting of rooms or subletting.
Makes
So,
sense.
so I brought this up last time. I was wondering what the intent is, because I think in the past, in going back before Airbnbs, I think Mark Becken even spoke of, or somebody spoke of with historic value of their grandma had rented out a room to visitors and artists that have come and done the old style of renting. What was the intent with this previously? Because this is not a new thing. It's what are we trying to avoid with not having someone to rent a room from their house?
Well, the ordinance doesn't reference like offer an option of an owner occupying the home and renting out one of their rooms. This is, so I think what they're trying to avoid is a situation where you had, large homes and potentially not large homes that have 4 or 5 bedrooms and multiple parties are sharing this large house, and that's a much more,
So I see that in the subletting and I'm supportive of that, but I just felt like I didn't understand the no individual room renting. The subletting, I understand that. If you couldn't rent the house and then sub-rent other things, I agree with that. But I read some other things in there that I didn't understand the intent of. And maybe I'm reading it
yeah,
wrong.
I don't know all the history with the discussion of why the community wouldn't have been, fine with, somebody owning a home and choosing to rent out one of their bedrooms. I guess we're getting a little bit into maybe more of a bed and breakfast type use, and that they have to be kind of owner occupied or have a manager on site that's, preparing breakfast and somebody's renting an individual room there. So maybe they saw some conflict with that.
I think some of the rationale might also be that, the zoning ordinance has specific standards for dwelling units. You have to have living and sleeping space and kitchen facilities, bathroom facilities. But that only applies to a single dwelling unit. And so if you start allowing rentals on a scale of less than a dwelling unit, then you could come into situations where there are living accommodations that don't provide the bare essentials of a dwelling unit that are being offered out for rent. And I guess, in one scenario, maybe it's a bedroom that's connected to the rest of the house, but there could be other situations where maybe someone, decides they want to like partition a room off that doesn't have, a bathroom or cooking and cleaning facilities. I think that might be some of the intent behind that restriction.
Okay, I'm not sure. I understand what is our role? Yeah, we don't want people putting tents in their yards or things possibly, but
That's a different provision.
yeah.
And I would note
Yeah.
too, that this is essentially a carryover from the existing.
Agreed, and I
restrictions.
brought it up as something that, what was the intent of it? And I'm
Hmm.
still not sure if I know, so.
Yeah, well, that I think predated
Well,
everyone
agreed,
on this side of the
agreed.
table.
Well, yeah, so it's
We
what-
can only speculate.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're cleaning it up, we're cleaning.
We're cleaning up, we're cleaning, so that's why, what is our intent, but keeping it? The subletting, I totally agree, the one contract, I like that wording. But when I see these, the wordings of one room or no individual renting of rooms.
It
Nope.
could just be a transient, not just trying to cut down on the sense of, living in more of a hotel place than, I don't know. I'm fine with that.
I was thinking that this was getting at, like, if I have 5 bedrooms, not renting to 5 different parties.
I agree with that. It's
today,
one
yeah.
contract, the one
That was
contract
the-
covers that though, right?
Oh, well, true. Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, that would already be covered there.
It's just to clean up that I didn't understand the intent previously, and if we were gonna be cleaning up, it was something I still don't know if I understand the intent. The subletting, the one contract, I agree with the wording.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
And here's my reason. I think our problems are the party houses and some of the bigger houses where this has got a natural compliance officer. There's someone living in that home. They're renting a room to someone and it's allowing tourists without creating some of the nuisances that we've talked about yet. The word, language tells me they can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you read the language of the actual ordinance, and I've read it several times because I don't think it's as clear as it could be, but it's an individual room in the short-term rental unit. So your example of a
Okay.
house that somebody's living in and they want to rent a bedroom, that whole house is not a short-term rental unit. It is a home of which that one bedroom then becomes the short-term rental unit. So this speaks
Under a
in
single
terms of
contract.
an individual room in a short-term rental unit.
Okay,
And then in turn, and I was trying to see if it was simply saying the same thing doubly about subletting, but in addition, if you rent the entire short-term rental unit, you can't sublet. I do see a difference. And it is, and I believe as this is actually worded, it does not apply to someone who owns a house, which the entire place is not a short-term rental unit, and rents off one bedroom, which would become the short-term rental
they
unit
have a
within
certain,
that house.
okay, if that's,
that make
if that's,
sense?
yeah, if that's allowed and within our, then I'm comfortable with the wording that's there. But it's just, I didn't read it that way. I'm not a lawyer.
In the future, they can call me
There you go.
Yeah, no, I agree, because
and
yeah.
I'll say, here's my gloss on it. Anyway.
Okay,
Okay.
no, that's good.
I'm comfortable with that too, if everyone else is, because I agree, CJ, I too don't, that doesn't
What
seem
was
to
the
raise
intent?
concerns, you know.
I
grandma
think
renting to an
we can
artist.
still take a look at it just
Okay.
to
Yeah,
make sure that
take-
that's
yeah.
We're all
clarified so
supportive
that
of
you
the
don't have to
subletting.
have Mark Lachey's level of interpretive skills
Perfect.
to figure that out.
Subletting and single contract, I think we're very much in part of, because I think
Right.
that's important.
But grandma and the artist we're okay with. Okay. Use of fireworks prohibited by STR occupants and visitors?
That's a new one. That one wasn't part of our discussion last week, I don't think, or last
I was
month.
thrilled to see that as somebody who just had two incidents of fireworks from
For our
short-term
city-
rentals.
For our city attorney, does that contradict state law with respect to everybody can use fireworks anytime they want within certain hours of certain days and blah, blah, blah?
Because it's connected to like a business type license, no.
Okay.
Well, and doesn't Saugatuck only allow fireworks on 4th of July? And I mean, we're pretty limited on when,
State of Michigan, is that way? State of
That's
Michigan.
State of Michigan.
okay. But I'm all for the, even on those days, to not let short-term rentals do fireworks.
That's what this would
Absolutely.
Short-term rentals would not be able to use fireworks on 4th of July.
As I read this.
Yeah, and I'm
that's
all,
why I
for
was
I'm
asking.
I'm all for
Or
that.
any of
As
the
am I.
state allowed
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Yeah.
And our city attorney agrees because it's a business license that on 4th of July, a short-term rental occupant cannot put on. shoot off bottle rockets.
Yeah, that's my understanding right now. I'll confirm it.
Okay.
The owner could come use fireworks at that location.
It's correct. It would just
Yes.
apply to
The
occupants
renter.
and visitors.
Okay.
No, that owner would be a visitor.
Okay, rental insurance must be maintained.
So there was some question about this last month and what the intent with that was. And so I did reach out to the fire department and provided their comments in your packet.
Makes sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, obviously someone didn't realize and didn't understand they're not having insurance for the renter was a problem, but is it our job to make them smarter? I don't know.
That's fair discussion.
And,
yeah.
and is there a level, is there a level of value that we expect them to keep? Is there,
Mm-hmm.
At
Yeah.
the
I don't have
risk
a
of
problem with it.
Sounding,
I don't have a problem with it, but it's a little big brotherish to me.
yeah,
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. Okay. I agree. I think it's a bit paternalistic, but I'm fine with it too. These are business owners. They should have some degree of sophistication, although I know that's not always the case. A
I'm
registry.
sorry, before we move on, just a
Yeah.
quick question for our esteemed attorney. If we did not require insurance to be maintained on rental, on short-term rentals, would there be liability for the city? Could somebody, I mean,
No.
okay,
And I assume that'll be part of the certificate process, so they'll have to prove their rental process to
Yeah,
the
I
city
think if
when
you
that.
look at, let me back up a little bit here. This would be section 99.5515. That's where they have to show some documentation showing that it's insured as a rental dwelling.
Yep. You have it memorized. In your sleep, right?
Okay, the registry, so that we have a public short-term registry.
Yes.
I agree 100%. I would like to propose that the registry include the maximum number of occupants allowed for each short-term rental. That's been a big bugaboo of mine as I drive past a house that's a short-term rental and I can't, I would hesitate to call either a code enforcement officer or the sheriff's deputy if I didn't know as a baseline how many people are allowed to be in that home.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah. Okay, so, and I'm taking notes, but I take it we don't need to, you're taking notes too, I'm assuming on these
Yeah,
points.
yeah, I mean,
okay.
that's more of a, yeah, it's kind of an administrative
Okay,
setup kind of a side.
It
of
is, but
Yep.
if you're delineating all the other things that need to be in the registry, I think that should be added.
okay. Okay, so current STR certificates, intent to grandfather.
Yeah.
Everyone, yeah,
Yep.
I think
Yep.
that seems reasonable.
That's the intent. The only question I had regarding this was a situation where a certificate is under suspension for violation. So let's say it's a 30-day violation, suspension of privilege or whatever. I think you outlined 3 different tiers.
Mhm.
Would that have any impact on the
So
grandfather?
those penalties would only apply to the short-term rental licenses that are issued
okay.
pursuant to this ordinance.
Gotcha.
And if you look at 9959A there, it says that those short-term rental certificates can operate under the regulations that were in effect when the certificate issued.
got you.
Or was
Okay.
issued, excuse me.
Jake, would there be a way to game this to like put the certificate into a trust that then would go to, so my trust's heirs would then get it so that
So the certificates are only good for 3 years that are currently issued by the city. And then if you look at 9959C, it says, once this ordinance is adopted, none of those certificates can be renewed. So
Oh, okay.
after 3 years, you can't renew it, then you have to come into the city's new licensing scheme.
Oh, okay. I'm somehow, so I've got a short-term rental license. It expires in 2 years. When I go to renew it, I renew it in these terms.
Yeah, so
Okay.
you have a certificate right now. When you come back to the
Okay.
city to get permission to operate a short-term rental again, you get a license under this ordinance.
So is there a way then, but the certificate has to be held in an individual's name and not a trust name. So you can't pass along the right to have or renew a
So I
certificate.
don't know that the city has those restrictions on certificates right now. The,
So they can't transfer ownership.
yeah, so they're non-transferable. There's also, and I think what you're getting into is the transferability, which is at,
Well, it's sort of like the house, in California, they would have rent control. And so you would always find somebody to move in so that it stayed in perpetuity. And I'm wondering if there's a way to game this
That's what
similarly.
I think when we get to the transfer of ownership section is.
yeah,
where
and
that'd
that's,
probably be a good
that's
discussion.
9963.
Okay.
And there's no prohibition on like what kind of entity, be it an LLC or a trust or an individual can own a license. But because you can have something like an LLC or a trust own a license, it gets a little clunky to define what a transfer is. So you don't have that end around that gives, like basically greater leeway to an LLC who, someone can just sell the LLC to the new owner of the
Right.
property and they can keep on operating a short-term rental with that same license where that wouldn't be able to be enjoyed by an individual license holder.
And so we're working to make that not possible.
It is not,
Yes, okay.
not possible under,
Okay.
under
What page number are
9963.
you on?
That would be on 11.
Okay.
I think we're at 59 on 9 right
It's,
now.
Yeah.
So I guess stay tuned.
That's coming up in
Okay,
a few
cool.
bullet points and we
Right.
can point you specifically to the ordinance
Okay.
language on that. Yeah. Because that is an important piece, I think, of this, especially if you guys are going to recommend, especially related to the caps discussion. So.
Okay. So we'll come back to that in a little bit, but duty to address issues, the license holder and or local agent will have to remedy within 2 hours. Any discussion on that one?
I love it, but I do.
I like it. We had some discussion last time that Steve, and we brought up about it was mileage and distance, and now it's a time and a remedy. So I sort of like it better.
So there's still a mileage requirement for the local agent. This specifically speaks to violations of the short-term rental ordinance or the city's noise ordinance by visitors or occupants of the short-term rental.
Okay.
And my question is, it is up to law enforcement then to identify it as a violation, correct?
So what we're, I think, well, my understanding of about what we're coming up with here too is that like, it's one thing to say you need to have a local agent. It's another thing to say that you actually have to do something when there's violations being.
Makes them
reported to you.
responsible to it.
Right. So the distance requirement as far as how far that person could be was lowered to that 25-mile mark, like you had come to a consensus on. Where this, I think, is going to come into play more is going to be, well, two things. If you have a public registry, some folks are going to be getting, some sort of complaints, but we're looking at a system where we might have like a 1-800 number reporting system with a third party that would have the ability to then, they would have the contact information for the agents and be able to kind of notify them and then track whether or not there's a response or the issue is resolved. So
What causes the clock to start?
So the way that's drafted right now would be a phone call or an email, and there's like language related to like what constitutes something being received, and Jake can speak to that language.
Yeah, so that's just in the next subsection there, subsection B.
I'm looking at the bullet points, not the other parts.
Yeah, is that?
So page 56 of your packet.
Would be notification from city?
Yep.
Okay,
You got the wrong version.
I see. So once they learn about it, once the agent learns of
Yeah.
it, they have 2 hours.
Then
Right.
application, action.
And then to Gets
Each note.
to Joseph's point there earlier, so one mechanism of enforcement would be through, the sheriff's department showing up and writing citations. There's also, if we kind of go on to the next section, there's this administrative remedy with the city, or actually not even administrative, it's just before eventually the city council, where there's a process for suspending and revoking the license, if there are those
Good.
complaints.
Just to walk through an example, it's easy for me. Somebody's garbage is overflowing. Ryan's on his way to work. He sees it. He makes a call in and then makes the notification. If they don't take care of it in 2 hours, that would be in a violation of this response.
Potentially, yeah.
Just as an example. Okay.
Or
So if-
what I guess where I was going, similar vein, kind of talk through a use case as a homeowner, I'd see something that they don't like. They call the city.
Then the city, yeah.
Does the city go then and actually verify that there's an issue and then the clock starts or after they do the notification or?
So the notification would be to, again, those are violations caused by residents and visitors. And then if there's other violations, like I guess that aren't being actively committed by people staying in the short-term rental, there's not necessarily like a cure period. So that could be grounds for initiating these procedures. But the way it's written is there's plenty of room for administrative processes dealing with how to, if, for instance, Ryan wants to issue a warning before taking any kind of formal enforcement action, and maybe there's a verbal warning, and maybe there's a letter, that's something that he can develop administratively, just like the city has, enforcing its other ordinances where, for instance, the zoning ordinance says that a violation is a civil infraction or what have you, but he doesn't immediately issue a civil infraction. There's kind of this prosecutorial discretion to work through the enforcement process before you necessarily get to the suspension and revocation.
I know we're getting.
That I understand.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we're not gonna, I don't see a circumstance where the city would be like, that agent didn't respond within 2 hours and 1 minute and here's your ticket, I mean, it's gonna be a situation where we're gonna try to, there's gonna be a lot of education up front, but if we're seeing a particular maybe agent or or property owner that's not responding to issues on a timely basis and there's a pattern of behavior, then we have, at least something to hold them accountable.
Okay.
What is a return receipt email message?
You can, when you send an email,
Make sure.
get
somebody
a
sees it.
notice when somebody opens it.
Sneaky, huh?
Like a certified letter email.
It's and the other person has to say, acknowledge that they read it. I mean, I get them sometimes, from people, I'm like, I'm not telling them I read your email, like.
That they read it, that they read it, that they opened it.
Right.
I use them at work, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Okay. Okay, we good on that one or any other
Yep.
questions?
Okay.
Okay, the next one is the suspension and revocation process that will be outlined.
I guess I had a question as to how this bullet was written. Any suspension time will occur during primary tourist season.
Right. So the idea there was that, if you had
I get it.
a violation
Yeah.
happen, towards the end
The
of
last week of-
the tourist season,
Right.
and it's a 3-month suspension, that's not
Right.
really gonna matter to someone. And so we have, I think the tourist season that we've identified, and let me know if this is off base, was May through
Got it.
September. So if
That
it's
was smart.
outside those
Makes
dates, then your
sense.
suspension is gonna basically be put on pause until the tourist season starts again.
I thought it read it was still, if you were
sorry,
suspended, it would
Not on
still
pause,
be.
it would stay in effect. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
And the city council is going to be the one making those ultimate decisions.
Right.
Yeah, understood.
And then to kind of soften the blow on people who have made immediate travel plans to the city in reliance on a short-term rental, there's that 60-night kind of grace period where even though the short-term rental license holder is going to get a suspension, they can honor the next essentially 2 months that have already, basically booked out and committed to rent there, and then that's when the suspension starts.
I
So
thought
it's
that was smart. That was fair.
a little complicated, but yeah, we wanted to find something that was, both sufficiently motivating and equitable.
Okay. Anything else in that one? Fraudulent complaints?
I thought
Anyone?
that was great. That was really smart to add to.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there were some folks that raised concerns about, well, what if
Yeah.
I'm getting all these fraudulent complaints made against me? Like what should be, so.
Yeah.
This
Right.
provides a mechanism for that too.
It's kind of just harassment, yeah. Licenses cannot be transferred. I think this was the one that kind of gets to some of the issues we were talking about earlier.
One comment, I looked, there is a definition of owner. So in the ordinance, so to address your concern about some kind of nebulous thing or some fancy legal thing,
It would be hard to game that.
I believe so under the definition of owner, yeah, in the definition section.
That wraps up the police powers section. So I think Ryan, unless you have a different recommendation, I know we had not a lot, but I think some feedback on some of these things. So I think we don't need to vote on this because, correct?
Yeah, we'll bring it back next month and see what your thoughts are and whether you want to make a recommendation at that time to the council.
Okay. Okay, great. Sounds good. All right, how's everyone feeling? Zoning ordinance amendments? Should we power through? Okay. So the zoning ordinance amendments, first item, 3-year certificate requirements are removed as STRs will now be required to obtain an annual license.
Yep.
That seems to make sense.
Yep.
Okay. Zoning will still regulate signage. It's the next one. Okay. Update accessory dwelling units to clarify who may occupy an ADU and when an accessory dwelling unit can be rented. Any questions or comments there? Okay. The next point was making language consistent in how an accessory dwelling unit size should be measured.
Makes
Yeah, I
sense.
think we had some confusion on that previously, so that's,
That came before us even.
yes, that came before us, so I think that's gonna be very helpful.
When is a foot not a foot
Yes,
or whatever?
right, right. Made clear that both an ADU and single family dwelling, even if rented under a single contract, will still each be required to have their own STR license and inspection.
I don't understand this requirement.
Right, so, and this is something that discussed with with the fire department as well, that essentially like, even though it's an accessory dwelling unit, there's a regulation that requires that the accessory dwelling unit be rented under a single contract with the single family dwelling, there's still a separate inspection for that individual dwelling unit essentially, that has to occur and its own occupancy that has to be set for it.
I say why? I mean, the fire department, if there's a single contract and there's a main house and an ADU, and if you have one license and one inspection, why doesn't the fire department come out and do both of those dwellings at the same time?
They would.
You'd have 2
But
licenses.
they would just have 2 licenses and 2 occupancies set. So that way you're not cramming 8 people in the ADU, even though 4 is allowed. And if you just set one max occupancy on the entire property, I think that's their part of the
Oh,
concern.
okay, I hadn't thought about that angle. Okay, okay.
Then, the ADU has to have its own,
Yeah.
fire safety checklist and
Okay.
alarms and fire extinguishers and all those good
I
things.
guess kind of going back to the discussion that we had around potential violations. If there's 2 licenses, how would that, but you're writing something under a single contract, how would that work? Could you potentially have a suspension on only one of them versus the other, even though they're both under the same contract or
Right, or would the ding kind of?
I
apply to
think
both?
there's a practical matter. You'd probably suspend both of them at once. Because it is a single contract. You can't rent them out separately. And so letting that property owner continue to,
But if the violation was only on the ADU and not on the house,
I
why
can
would
see
that
somebody
violation come
arguing that.
against that?
that's all.
That's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, and again, I think what we're going to see here is probably, if we're getting to the point of asking for a suspension or revocation, it's like a multiple, like either really egregious violations that are occurring or multiple issues that are occurring before we get to that point to where it's probably an entire property that on a regular basis is causing some problems. And
It'll self-fix itself.
I can also see this coming up if we do talk about caps. I would assume the caps would be on the number of licenses. So that if there are 2 licenses for a single address, I could see people saying, well, wait a minute, that handicaps the number of licenses that we allow.
definitely something that you're going to want to discuss if that's the discussion the planning commission wants to continue to have. Definitely. Yep.
Yeah, if it can only be one rental contract, why would it want to be 2 separate? But I understand the 2 different occupancies, 2 different inspections, but I'm not sure the 2 licenses make sense to me.
Just something else to throw in there. You can short-term rent an ADU and have the single-family dwelling not be rented as long as it's owner occupied.
Right.
Correct.
They receive your approval. Yeah.
Correct. But I thought this was, if you have basically 2 rental units on a parcel, one is the primary residence and one is a ADU. That is a single contract, but now we're requiring 2 licenses, which take up 2 licenses if we do a cap. I understand what you're saying about you want not to have nobody living in the primary, or you 2 people in the primary residence and 20 people living in the ADU.
So I think if you go down the path of caps, I think that issue could be addressed through, the right language. So I think your point is well taken that do we want to, count the ADU towards the total number of licenses, and that should be taken into consideration. If you don't want ADUs to be included in that number, I think that's something that we could account for.
Once we talk about caps.
Correct.
There'll be an asterisk.
Right. Now, if you feel as a planning commission, the recommendation should be just, 1 license, yep, we can go that direction too, so.
I mean, maybe 1 license and two inspections, or I mean, all right, now I'm getting late. The license will dictate the occupancy, correct?
Yep.
So so what you're saying is if it were a single license for a main building and an ADU, it wouldn't split out which occupancy for each one.
And actually that could disadvantage the owner. So I've got a 4-bedroom home and like an ADU that could sleep 4, or say I have a 5-bedroom home. So I could get up to 12. If it was a single license, then having an ADU wouldn't do me any good. Because I could only get 12.
If we're going to set a max occupancy, I think that's a really good point. And I think, the short-term rental by definition is in a dwelling unit. It's a separate provision in the accessory dwelling unit regulations that require the single contract piece. So if you're just looking at short-term rentals in a dwelling unit, well, accessory dwelling is a type of dwelling unit, so it has to have a license and inspection and occupancy.
The same would, be true if you had like a duplex with a short-term rental in each of them. I mean, even though they're right next to each other and you own both of them, they'd need a separate license. Although in this case, they have to be under a single contract.
Except they probably would have separate addresses and separate
Well, not always.
parcel numbers.
I'm fine with this for now.
Okay.
Me too.
It was just
No, good.
something I wanted to
Good,
knock
good.
around.
Good
Appreciate
food,
it.
and I think
Yep.
it's good thinking for the cap discussion.
It is.
Um,
Somebody remember that.
yes, yeah. Ryan, tag you, clarified where, so just some, this was, I think, Ryan, you described it as some cleanup work, clarified where certain dwellings and apartments can be located in these various zoning districts, and clarified which may be used for STRs.
Yeah, and it's not entirely a cleanup. It's actually, this was a kind of a change. This would actually be allowing, be more permissive. And I see Dave popped on, he lit up there. So maybe you have a comment on this, Dave? You've been quiet tonight, man. So we're gonna like punt to you.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So This was based on a conversation that we had a little bit during the waterfront project, where we thought that first floor apartments would be okay in the waterfront preservation zoning district, but not fronting Water Street. So we had the conversation a bit about for the other zoning districts, and I think Ryan mentioned before about the intent of our first floors on our kind of our central commercial type zoning districts, our commercial zoning districts. We want activity, we want customers, we want window shopping, activity and vitality downtown. And where we have like an office or a residential unit, so there's some communities feel like that takes away from that downtown shopping atmosphere where you have retail, restaurants, and activity. So the previous or the current and previous zoning ordinances had restrictions on first floor activities, but we felt that if that apartment unit or that ADU or that was not on the first floor fronting that main street, and we have, as Ryan mentioned before, right now we have it as shall not front the primary street. So let's just say that the unit was facing the rear or the side, and it wasn't really the prominent fixture on that road frontage. We really didn't seem like there was an issue with that, because the intent is to reserve that space for restaurants and shopping and other activities like that. So this would address a couple sections in the zoning ordinance, the various commercial districts that would allow them dwelling units on upper floors and only first floor if the units are not fronting the primary street on which the structure is located. So, and again, like Ryan said before, we're going to have a case of corner lots. So we may identify those, just the streets by name. We may say Water Street, Culver, Griffith. We may just say street name, or we may say any street on which the building fronts a first floor dwelling cannot face. So we wanted to open that up for a discussion to see if we should open up these other districts similar to how we did for the waterfront preservation district.
I like it. I think it matches the intent of why we didn't want them on the first floor, but it allows, because we want those businesses on the front water or right on the street side.
Makes sense.
Okay.
I agree.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, very helpful. And then I assume no one has an issue with the typo correction. The flood
I'd like to
hazard.
discuss that in
We discussed that.
What was the intent of the typo?
Yeah, right.
Well,
So, so on the zoning ordinance amendments, then it sounds like we are comfortable moving forward with the public hearing next month. Do we need a vote on that, Ryan, for sending this, or? Okay. Okay,
we'll get it noticed and plan on that for next month.
okay, great. And then the noise ordinance.
So I have a couple of thoughts on the noise ordinance. One, I think it was when you actually got into the language of the ordinance, you noted that we could think about having it be 10 PM Sunday through Thursday and 11 PM on weekends. I don't know if we can distinguish residential neighborhoods from commercial we can't. Okay. I still would favor that. I know that I might be in the minority. When we get to leaf blowers could go from 7 AM until 11 PM. And Steve, I'm not talking about you, but I do have a neighbor who leaf blows at 9 PM. And it seems like leaf blowing, maybe we could restrict that from 8 AM to 8 PM or something.
How about snow plows?
I am
That is
less,
addressed in the
I
exception.
am less, I haven't, personally, so this is me, one, I don't think the snow plows need to snow plow. I mean, the city snow plows, you mean?
Well, or snow blower or anybody. We should pick times and not get real picky, in my opinion.
So right now, as written, if you look at E5, snow blowers and other snow removal equipment, that's as long as it's
Or leaf-
engaged in the removal of snow, that's just exempt.
Yeah, I'm fine with snow blowers, but leaf blowers is more discretionary.
So then there's not a specific time tied to that necessarily. So some of the
There
provisions.
it was from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. I'm
Oh,
pretty sure.
previously, is that what you're
For
saying?
leaf, I'm pretty sure.
That just kind of mirrors the quiet hours of 7 a.m. or sorry,
I
11 p.m.
mean,
to
you
7
know,
a.m.
I will tell you, a leaf blower at
Specific to that
9:30 just seems cruel.
I have to, yeah, I have to say there's something about leaf blowers. I don't know if it's the gas ones, or, I mean, the
Oh.
gas ones kill me. I know
They're
my
just-
neighbors.
And they're really bad for the environment. So, you know, encouraging people to do other things. But beyond that, it just seems, I mean, that is personally a huge nuisance. I live among a lot of leaf blowers.
See, I mean. well,
I
So
actually-
just
I-
Help me think if I'm wrong. So
I'm
are you,
lobbying for one person.
are you referring to the
No,
previous
you-
version had a time limit for blowers? Because.
When you go
I-
further into the,
I actually don't, I actually agree, Holly. You should listen to me complaining on
yeah,
Friday
it's
afternoons.
E4.
There's that kind of blanket.
It's customary lawn maintenance equipment for residential use such as lawnmowers,
I was
leaf
on the
blowers,
blanket blowers prohibition. Okay.
and chainsaws. I'm fine with, well, I mean, if somebody's stupid enough to chainsaw in the dark, but, I don't know. I just throw that out for consideration.
I mean, I know this probably isn't our purview, but some, I think communities, and I think even the state of California have outlawed some leaf blowers that are loud and bad for the environment. That might be a city council issue, but
Closer to home, I believe Grand Rapids.
Ann Arbor.
did they?
Ann Arbor.
Okay,
did.
oh, I didn't know
Grand
that.
Rapids.
So I think they have an exclusion for fall or something when the leaves need to be picked up.
Anyway, I throw that out there for consideration.
I have no problem with that. I mean, that does seem ridiculous to leaf blow at 9:30, but I also find it just, I have a general issue with leaf blowing and how noisy it can be.
And I don't think that would,
Well-
I don't think that would interfere with professional leaf blowers, because I don't think most
Yeah, if
leaf blowing
there's a
businesses.
different time that you think is appropriate. I don't. It's in front of you now. I don't have a problem
Okay.
with having that direction.
Can I say on that?
I'm for less than more. So if I pay myself, I can then go blow leaves because I'd be a professional leaf blower at that point.
No, I'm saying leaf blowers don't typically, I don't think this would disadvantage
I could be the
leaf
late.
blowing business.
There is no requirement that it has to be a professional.
Well, I know, but that's, I think is what she's suggesting.
No, what I'm saying is, I think if we limited it from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., there might be neighbors who like to leaf blow at 9:30 who would be disadvantaged, but I think Joe's leaf blowing business would not be disadvantaged because Joe's professional leaf blowing business doesn't blow leaves at 9:30.
That would also apply to lawnmowers as it's currently written. Does that
And
seem
Not a lot, but
problematic?
I don't, it's leaf blowing is a noise that is, I just think,
It's a higher, it is a higher decibel. I mean, I think. Just-
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are,
okay.
there are
I would put them right in there with lawnmowers.
Okay, well, I'm happy to include all of those.
Well, I mean, another suggestion could be, I mean, you have a separate kind of time frame for construction noises. That's from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Perhaps you do something that might align more with that.
I would be all for that.
Yeah, I would just, if we could just maybe just tighten that up, that would be good for mine.
And I read something, did I understand that construction couldn't happen on Sunday? Sunday's exempt, I can't,
yeah.
That's the current ordinance actually states that,
Yeah.
yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that would be a problem for your blowers and lawnmowers then.
We don't have to add blowers and lawnmowers to that section necessarily, but I mean.
It would
we
just
could-
be the same.
No, I think,
Oh, I
people
got
should
you,
be able
yeah.
to blow leaves on Sunday. I mean, I get that.
Yeah, that's a very narrow.
Even.
Mm.
We don't honor the Sabbath and
Just
keep it
now
rolling.
discovering that about me.
I want to buy a Chick-fil-A on Sunday, but gosh.
So it sounds like on the noise, the noise ordinance will also kind of revisit next month before referring out to council.
Say what again? I'm sorry.
Oh, I think I'm
Oh, the
hearing
noise
that
ordinance as it is?
we'll know that there'll be some tweaks or no?
Well, that's why I think we need some direction from you.
Okay.
Would you want us to change the
Yeah,
times or
if it-
not? I mean, that.
Any suggestions? We're happy to hear them and revise the draft before the next meeting.
Okay.
I think it can be worded, if we were to do it, the whole list, chainsaws, lawnmowers, leaf blowers, where are they? There's a whole list.
It's page
Four.
3 of
Page
the,
three.
Yep.
E4, that,
E4.
yeah, move it to the same time as, construction noises, 7 AM to 9 PM.
I'm okay with that. I think that makes sense.
And if I were making a personal, gosh, construction starting at 7 AM in the summer is a bane of my existence, but I'm not gonna,
Nail guns going off.
oh, yeah. And they're right there at 7.
Yep, they are.
But but yeah, if we made E4 to match construction, I think that'd be okay.
Seems reasonable.
I'm okay with that.
The government's already infringing, it's just a matter.
I know. Back.
Yeah.
You push it back.
Fight the good fight.
Oh, that's good.
Okay,
Good to wrestle
any-
with these things.
And so then, anything else in the noise ordinance?
Nope.
And that we'll revisit it next month. I think that brings us to this 7C, short-term rentals, discussion of residential caps and parking. I'm conscious that it is 9:30. I think maybe, I don't know, David, I think we had talked about your presenting your memo. I certainly don't think we'll complete the discussion. I think maybe we can at least hear your overview if everyone agrees. Or do we want to, yeah,
And then we can all ponder, we can leave pondering.
leave pondering?
Dave's wisdom.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I could give a quick, I was going to give you about
Okay.
an hour, but I'll knock it down to about 2 minutes.
okay.
So yes, I think this is really kind of an introduction to what I would kind of consider a permit cap appropriateness study or analysis. So I think this is a really good time to talk about this, since we had the presentations from the 2 other communities. And then you have just worked through the police power and zoning ordinance recommendations. So we're really in a position now to start discussing the policies such as caps and possibly parking restrictions and maybe even separations, as was suggested by one of the other communities. So as mentioned in the report, I think the citywide cap was not necessarily overly supported, but there was support by full-time residents and maybe more at a more neighborhood level application. And I think when we're considering a variable application of caps, we really need to have a better understanding of areas where they might apply and the reasons why. So, and the task force actually did recognize this as probably a next step in the conversation, and they recognize that this as a challenging discussion, and then one would have to be based on a further review. And so I see the need for really kind of a finer grain review of zoning district and neighborhood level character and land use in zoning. So so on the second page, what I would recommend is that, similar to what we did for the waterfront preservation zoning district, but certainly not to that degree or intensity unless you felt that way. But I think we could do maybe a look at the character and the different factors listed on page 2 of the memo, just to try to get us to a point that we can make informed decisions on whether or not we implement caps or separations or other restrictions to address some of the community concerns. So how I broke it down is things that we can look at. First off, the response areas from the survey. So you have 4 main areas for responses. So I think that's important to recognize. Zoning districts. So the task force report shows 9 residential zoning districts, and then it has the information concerning the proportion of short-term rentals versus owner-occupied or long-term rental units. We can look at the land use in terms of like, is this primarily a single family area? Is it a single family area with a great deal of ADUs? Or are we getting into more of an area where we have, multiple family dwellings? The character of an area, I think walkability, it's proximity to downtown, and then just the general intensity and density of the area is important to study. And then lastly, I think parking analysis could be a bit more involved, but there are some concerns with, the number of occupants versus the ability for a site to accommodate all of the visitors' vehicles. So, certainly some areas with larger parcels, you could park a lot in the driveway. Other areas are going to be relying on public lots or public streets. And in some cases where we have a great number of visitors or higher densities, that may add an added stress on the system. So we may want to do kind of maybe more of a high level parking analysis as we look at these neighborhoods that we'll itemize. So with that, nothing more to report on the issue. Just I would suggest we take a deeper dive at a neighborhood level to be able to have the CAP conversation, just so that you can have informed conversation and then make your final recommendations on the matter.
Okay, thank you. So we will continue, we can ponder that in the next month and discuss further at the next meeting. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Communication is the next, I'm sorry, 2023 activity report.
So, I'll cover this quickly, Madam Chair, because I trust all of you read it, but a busy year for you, as you know, because you've been here and you've had a lot of long meetings, and there was no canceled meetings. In fact, you had a couple extra meetings, but 95 zoning and sign permits were issued this year. That's up from the past several years. And that doesn't include, short-term rental certificates, historic district, all the other permitting that comes through my desk. That's just zoning and sign permits. Enforcement activity, we heard really clear direction from the council that they wanted enforcement and follow up on complaints that were being made. So we had 86 open cases this year. And then I provided you with a breakdown of kind of the categories that they kind of fell into. As far as short-term rental activity, we had 90 renewal or new short-term rental certificates that were issued this year. And then your activity, certainly, I'm sure you remember every one of these, but.
So how many total short-term rental permits do we have now?
I haven't pulled a reports in a while. I think the last time I looked, we were around 275. Yep. So planning commission activity, you certainly are well aware of that. And then I took your 2023 priorities that you had set for the year, and it's kind of laid out some progress. And essentially, with maybe one exception related to the fee in lieu of parking, I mean, you've hit, and then Park Street sidewalks and widening. That was something that kind of was picked up by the Parks and Public Works Committee. But otherwise, I mean, you've made either completed a lot of these or made really significant progress. So kudos to you and all of your consistent work over the last year. So from here, we'll take this report to the city council, so they're able to see your work, and we'll probably need to find some time to schedule, or maybe not schedule separately, but add in an agenda item, even though you have a lot of agenda items about setting goals for this year, even if they're just get some of the work done that you're doing now. So.
Before we move off of short-term rentals, or I guess we already have, but to go back quickly, is there any way, I mean, something for you and Chairman Mans to consider is if there's a way to, especially, it felt like we were pretty close on all the stuff we just looked at tonight, of getting, if we wait for a month and then it gets to count. It's taking so long, and it feels like we just made this huge momentum. Is there to consider, maybe we could have an extra meeting to sign off on those and get them to council as we're starting to deliberate on CAP, so we can, I mean, it's been about a year since we've, started this whole process. It would be great if we could. And again, I know.
On the items that we discussed tonight?
Yeah, the police powers, and since that's going to be council's decisions anyway.
So two things there. The zoning amendments are something that, we have to have a
Right,
public
yeah,
hearing.
we have to do
And that notice essentially has to
Right,
go out in
yeah.
next week's paper.
So maybe
we're-
just the police power. Is there any way to
The issue
accelerate?
with that is that you're gonna run into the way it's written right now with the police powers ordinance is that it wouldn't go into effect until the zoning ordinance is adopted. So that way we don't have conflicting regulations. So, so that's the way it's written. Now, certainly tonight you can say, well, pass a motion and send it based on the changes that you made and we can get it to the city council and, but you know, we just, I don't want a situation where we have short-term rental certificates required and licensing required and, so
Okay.
we're looking at a little bit more time, but it also gives the community a little bit more time to digest the police power ordinance updates, provide some further comment next week or next month to you as well, even though that one won't be a formal public hearing.
It's the pace of government, which is important.
It is. Now, if you want to have a separate discussion about caps at a special meeting or something like that, that's within your purview as a planning commission to
Yeah,
schedule special
that might be
meetings,
the way
so.
to go.
And yeah, and again, that might be too, we might consider doing that jointly with city council so that, again,
That's a
just
great idea.
if we can share, so, because the discussion will be, I think, pretty, I mean, everybody's gonna have the same questions and discussions if there's a way to co-deliberate. I leave that to the wisdom of the planning chair and
And mayor. So, yeah, I mean, staff is happy to do whatever the desires of the two bodies, so.
I think it's a
Okay.
great idea.
Yeah, great idea. Okay, so communication is the next item on the agenda. We had none, which leads us to reports of officers and committees. So we do have the zoning administrator activity report. Any questions on that? Busy as always, it looks like last month, so.
Right.
Public, another public comment period, so we'll open it up for public comment.
By sleeping, tired.
Mark Kimball, 550 Spear. Yeah, I just want to, I know you've ran out of time on the short term. We've been going at this a long time. I don't want to get into what we call in IT analysis paralysis. You know, you can spend time and you can look at statistics and they're lies, damn lies and statistics. When we had the survey the last time, there was no clear cut question. Do you support caps? It was a mishmash of how do I answer this? So saying there was no clear support for it is obvious because there was no clear question. So if we do want to do this, it has to be clear and it has to be quick. My understanding is every house that is sold in Saugatuck since this whole thing started has been for a short-term rental. There isn't going to be anyone left here living. It's going to be a giant, what do they call it, a distributed hotel, not a city. And we moved here as a city and not to be in a hotel. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to add to those comments, you need to speed it up. I heard you say, Ryan, that you issued 95 short-term rental licenses this last year. I didn't hear you say how many were eliminated. So in the course of the year, we got 95 new rentals?
Those were renewal and
Those-
new.
Okay,
so.
well, I would like to know, I guess, how many net new ones there were, but I think it's a lot based on my understanding of what's been happening in my neighborhood. So we do need to speed it up. You need to schedule that meeting and, you know, get it going because we're losing our town. And lastly, Holly, I love that you brought up about the leaf blowers. Totally support those comments. Shut those things down.
Any comments, any other comments either in the room or online?
Steve's got his hand raised.
Oh,
Madam
Steve,
Chair. Yep.
sorry, Steve.
Hey, not to delay things, one great meeting, great job and running it. Couple things regarding the leaf blowers and the construction. I know you left in there the 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. I highly encourage as a commission to kind of look at that and think maybe it should be more like 8 to 8. I think 7 a.m. is too early to start. And I think 9 p.m. is too late to be having that type of noise. So an 8 to 8 would be something I would at least say is you might want to consider putting in as a recommendation. Regarding the caps on short-term rental, I think David did kind of lay out some ideas that we may want to try to do some neighborhood type of studies. And if we were going to go down that avenue, it might be beneficial that we get some of that work done before February's meeting. Otherwise, we're going to go into February's meeting, start talking about caps, and then we'll have to say, well, how are we going to define a neighborhood? What constitutes, like we talk about house feet, how do we stop somebody from securing a license just so nobody within 1,000 feet of them can get a license? These are all things that would have to be done as part of a neighborhood study. So I would like to have conversations, with Ryan as well as with our council on some things we might be able to prep for the February meeting, even knowing that we haven't made decisions on how we want to go forward with caps. But I think it's pretty clear that we do want to have the discussion. So that's just kind of part of my thought. And then regarding the timing, I know everyone says it's been a while. We're in January, and as you heard from these other cities, they had numerous meetings. Their city council had 8 different meetings, and I think it was Charlevoix before they implemented something. We're still looking at trying to get everything in place prior to the start of what really is the short-term rental season in Saugatuck, which is we've already identified as kind of like May through September, whether it's April through October, whatever the dates are. I think we clearly are setting ourselves up with a goal to try to have those in place before the primary season of 2024. So I'm just asking for I think all of us as a commission probably agree that we're just asking for the citizens to give us the time to make certain that we don't do something without thinking it through properly. And I think we're moving forward at a really good pace. That's really my comments. And I thank everybody who participated tonight, and thanks to those who prepared the packets.
Thank you. Anyone else? I don't think I saw any other hands online, so with that, we will close the public comment and move on to commissioner comments.
Nothing today.
Okay.
I think I might have been the only one who didn't applaud the staff for attorney for the momentous work they did, so I add mine. One quick comment, as we talk about caps and neighborhoods, something I hadn't thought of, a neighbor of mine said, well, if we talk about on the hill, does that include Pleasant Street, for example? Does it go all the way to Maple Street, or is it Elizabeth to Spear to Allegan? So that's something to look at also, is what's on the hill. Is it all the way to State Street, or does it stop at Allegan? So it's just the one comment I wanted to get out there for everybody to think about is if we do talk about caps in a defined area, we have to think about, it's not a cut and dry defined, in my mind, not cut and dry defined area of what that would where that would be. So.
Yeah, a quick thank you again to everybody. Yes, I mean, my sense is it's residential neighborhoods is what, it's at least one of my view, and whether it's I think we can look at it, we need to look at it sort of more holistically. I'm kind of with the yes, we need to do our, whatever left we need to do, but I am mindful that I know it's taking a lot of time. So, thanks.
Yeah, again, thank you for putting this information is phenomenal. A lot of work went into it. So thank you again. I agree with everything. I agree with the concept of putting caps in residential places, residential districts. I certainly think it's worth talking about. Would strongly suggest that even if we can't get the council together, that we as a planning commission, I know we have to have advance notice for the community, but we should have a separate meeting to try and accelerate and have the discussion sooner rather than later. I don't know if that's possible or not before our February meeting, but I would certainly be supportive of it.
Thank you. So I don't have anything new to add other than I agree. I'd be supportive as well. And also just another thank you for all the amazing work. Truly. It's really impressive. The package that came before us. I know all the work that went into that. So with that, we have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Anyone want to?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah.
They try to get some sleep.
It's not gonna happen. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh.
Confirm so far.
I think you were